Chapter 2381. Facing such a situation, Xiao Yang felt an incomparable headache. Even if he wanted to change it, it would not be an easy task. As such, he could only ask Sun Dishing to leave and think about this problem alone. How to come up with an accurate countermeasure became his current problem. Although the flowing cloud realm had started to celebrate, Xiao Yang was not interested at all. This was only temporary entertainment. An even more terrifying war was still to come. Therefore, Xiao Yang had no choice but to think carefully about the various matters involved. However, the problem soon returned to its original point. If he was not strong enough, no matter how many formations he set up and how many preparations he made, it would be difficult to turn the situation around. Even though the White Bear tribe was one of the top tribes in the Wanshou realm and was in the top 10, it was still only the strength of one tribe. If the Wanshou realm decided to declare war on the Flowing Cloud realm, they would not be facing just one tribe but the entire realm. However, the only thing that made Xiao Yang feel like he could breathe was that the main forces of the Wanshou realm were fighting in the Yin Flame realm. Therefore, they had a chance to catch their breaths. If we can join forces with the Yin Flame realm and borrow their strength, it's not impossible, Xiao Yang muttered with a frown. The current 4-realm alliance, Yin Flame realm and Wanshou realm, were like 3 legs of a tripod. Among them, the Wanshou realm was the strongest. In that case, the 2 weaker worlds would naturally need to join forces to fight against the strongest world, so that the other world would not be able to obtain any resources and possess overwhelming strength. It seemed that this was the only way to balance things out. This was a strategy that had been set from the beginning. However, the Divine Emperor had clearly said that he would only finalize this matter after he came out of seclusion. As such, they did not dare to act rashly for now. Although the Yin Flame realms Almighty had visited last time, it was more of a probe. Whether or not they would be able to form an alliance was still unknown. Perhaps the Yin Flame realm also had their own ambitions. When the time came, it would not be impossible for them to gather their forces to deal with the 4 realms alliance. Sometimes a person's heart was the most difficult to fathom. There were many schemes and plots within it, and it wasn't something that could be avoided with just a few words. As long as one's strength was strong enough to make the other party wary, only then would one have the qualifications to negotiate with the other party. Once they were too weak, the other party would not see any value in forming an alliance, and it was inevitable that they would have other thoughts. These were all unchanging truths since time immemorial. Many people could do things that others could not accept for their own benefit. Among cultivators, most of them had become indifferent to human relationships due to their long years of cultivation. After tossing and turning and thinking left and right, Xiao Yang found it difficult to make a decision. His own strength was insufficient, and it seemed that even wanting to join forces with others was an impossible task. Even if he took the initiative to form an alliance, he might end up digging a grave for himself. That was hard to say. Because of Xiao Yang's intentions, the Flowing Cloud realm became peaceful. Of course, it was natural to celebrate after a victory. If he stayed too long in a tense and urgent situation, if he didn't relax his state of mind when he had the chance, problems would arise sooner or later. A few days later, Xiao Yang accompanied Li Fengmu and the Qin Emperor to tour the Flowing Cloud realm. Of course, what they cared about the most was the 3 extra pieces of land in the Flowing Cloud realm. They had not looked carefully before, so now that they had the opportunity, they naturally wanted to feast their eyes on them. Of the 3 grotto heavens, only the central mountain was barren. After seeing this, everyone could not help but sigh. The central mountain had been under Xiao Yang's management for a few years, and it had improved. However, because of the battle with Bai Wuxi, it had become a barren land again. The Qin Emperor could not help but feel a bit of heartache. The last time he came, he had walked around here and knew that there were spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs everywhere, but now only a handful of yellow soil was left. It could be said that Xiao Yang's hard work in these few years had been destroyed because of that battle. Who in the world would not be moved? On the contrary, Xiao Yang acted as if nothing had happened. It was as if he did not care that his hard work had been destroyed. In fact, in Xiao Yang's opinion, it was most important to protect their foundation before this disaster. As long as their foundation was there, they had the possibility of rising again. As for these external things, it was fine if they were gone. Although it was a pity, it was not to the extent of hurting them. Lord Xiao is truly the #1 person in the history of the flowing cloud world, opening up new territories, guarding the borders. All of these are easily accomplished. Li Fengmu sighed in admiration. This could be said to be Li Fengmu's first time in the flowing cloud realm. He had heard many rumors before, so he had a general understanding of the flowing cloud realm. All he knew was that it was barren and weak. However, after seeing it today, he realized that in these few years, the flowing cloud realm had changed drastically because of one person. Especially the appearance of the distant South Grotto and the North Peak Grotto. It proved Xiao Yang's strength. I was just lucky and found these hidden lands by accident. Xiao Yang smiled awkwardly. Li Fengmu smiled but did not speak. He naturally knew that there were many secrets in the flowing cloud realm. The 3 extra grotto heavens did not appear out of thin air. Every world had its own secrets. Even if they were allies, it was impossible for them to expose it so easily. Therefore, if he did not speak, he would not ask. Some secrets were related to the foundation of one's own realm. If outsiders knew about it, it would be like someone else holding onto one's life. No normal person would do something like that. Leader Xiao, don't be so humble. Or else, what am I supposed to do? Li Fengmu smiled bitterly. Li Fengmu created the Sword Heart realm. Since ancient times, it was the highest realm and he was proud of it. However, compared to Xiao Yang, who opened up new territory, he was still far from it. Qin Wang yawned and said impatiently, "You guys can continue to brag about each other. How boring." Li Fengmu laughed loudly. "I've seen what I should see and said what I should say. Leader Xiao, if you have time in the future, come visit the Sword Heart realm often. I will take my leave now. Goodbye." Xiao Yang clasped his hands. Then Li Fengmu left on his sword. Chapter 2382. Since that old man has left, there's no reason for me to stay here any longer. Goodbye. Qin Wang did not wait for Xiao Yang to speak before he turned into a ray of golden light and flew into the sky. To Qin Wang, saying goodbye was a bit awkward. Hence, he just said it clearly and left. There was no need for him to be long-winded. Xiao Yang shook his head and smiled as he watched the 2 almighties leave. To be able to get to know these allies was a great blessing in life. In this war, if they had not arrived in time, who knows what kind of trouble would have happened. At least, if he wanted to win, he would have to make more plans and sacrifice more people. However, because of their timely support, these problems were eliminated. The 2 of them were the pillars of their respective worlds. It was not easy for them to stay in the flowing cloud world for such a long time. If a world did not have a strong person to oversee it, it was a very scary thing. Leader Xiao, although Ji Fei is a bit stubborn and does not understand many things, I hope you can understand and help. Luo Ji said sincerely. Ji Fei from 1,000 years ago was also a junior that Luo Ji relied heavily on. However, the world was unpredictable. Since it had happened and become a foregone conclusion, there was no need to hold on to it and not let it go. Since Ji Fei made his own choice, he naturally had to respect it. Ji Fei from the Sun Snow world had died in the Tomb of the Gods. The current Ji Fei was reborn by Xiao Yang. You're exaggerating. We're all friends. It's natural for us to help each other. Xiao Yang said. Luo Ji smiled and nodded. Although Xiao Yang could be said to be the most powerful person in the 4-realm alliance, he did not have any arrogance. This made people feel comfortable. In the future, if anything happens in the flowing cloud world, as long as I can leave, I will definitely come. Luo Ji finished speaking and turned to leave. Because of the battle with the White Bear tribe, they had no choice but to come. It was also because they had completely defeated the White Bear tribe that they dared to continue staying here. However, in the 3,000 Middle Worlds, there were too many things that they did not know. However, after staying here for a long time, they could not help but worry about their own world. They were afraid that something would happen. They came without hesitation and left without hesitation. Looking at the three of them disappearing, Xiaoyang was in a daze, because they were about to face the invasion of the 10,000 Beast Realm. He had not thought of how to bring up this topic. Although they had yet to receive any concrete information, they had to be on guard. In fact, in Xiaoyang's eyes, this was something inevitable. These were the results of Xiaoyang's careful analysis of what he knew about the Myriad Beast Realm from the souls of the White Bear tribe. The Myriad Beast Realm had always been keen on invading and expanding. What they wanted was to plunder the fortune and resources of other worlds to strengthen themselves. Now, the Four Realms Alliance was like a child in their eyes. It was a great tonic. How could they ignore it? At this moment, Princess Mingzhu silently walked over. She looked at the man with a solemn expression. How could Princess Mingzhu not know what he was worried about? However, even if they were well aware of this, they did not want to reveal all of this. After all, it wasn't easy for him to get some breathing space and let himself have a good rest. If some things were exposed, then everyone would be unhappy. Therefore, they had a tacit understanding in this aspect. Even if they were worried, they would be very rational and not say a word. Unless they had a way to deal with it, no one would easily speak of it. You don't have to think too much. Who knows? I might be able to reach a higher level when I go back this time. By then, the two of us can personally go to the Inflame world to discuss the matter of the alliance. After hesitating for a long time, Princess Mingzhu spoke. Hearing this, Xiaoyang was stunned for a moment. Soon after, his eyebrows twitched and his eyes became a little more spirited. Since Princess Mingzhu was able to say such words, some things naturally became clear. Congratulations. I didn't expect you to be so fast. Xiaoyang said enviously. People with fortune were indeed different. In such a short period of time, she had found the opportunity to break through again. I'm not sure yet. I just have a feeling. It's hard to say whether I'll succeed or not. Princess Mingzhu said helplessly. Princess Mingzhu was also very worried about the changes in the current situation. Therefore, she wanted to grow up quickly. That was the only way she could stop the invaders from harboring any thoughts about her. Otherwise, the war would continue for a long time, and the damage to their world would only become greater and greater. It was even possible that they would not be able to recover from the setback in the end. So what if she was strong? Even if she could represent a world, it was difficult to improve her overall strength because of this. If you didn't condense 9 small spiritual veins, I'm afraid your breakthrough speed wouldn't be slower than mine. The facts have proven that you're right. The support of 9 small spiritual veins is indeed amazing. Princess Mingzhu smiled. Previously, she had not been able to understand this problem. However, after pondering for a few days, she found some clues. Moreover, Princess Mingzhu also had some new insights because of this. Sometimes, if you think more, you might be able to make some new progress. Xiaoyang smiled but did not say anything. However, what Princess Mingzhu said was indeed the truth. Xiaoyang was almost invincible among those in the same realm as him because he had a good foundation. Therefore, his strength was much stronger than cultivators in the same realm. In addition to the experience from his previous life, it was enough to close a lot of gaps. But I almost couldn't break through to the martial emperor realm. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. Princess Mingzhu was startled at first, but then she smiled. It turned out that he wasn't so sure himself, and he still had some worries in his heart. I'll come out of seclusion in a month at most. We'll decide what to do then. Princess Mingzhu said. Xiaoyang nodded and said, Then I'll wait for the good news. Princess Mingzhu then leaped up and left. In the current Four Realms Alliance, the divine capital was still the place with the most abundant spiritual qi. It could be said that most of the rising stars in the four realms were sent to the divine capital. It was all for the sake of speeding up their cultivation. In the midst of war, it was also very important to create a steady flow of powerhouses. At least for now, compared to before the war with the White Bear tribe, although they had suffered some losses, their overall strength was still much stronger. Chapter 2383. In front of the Sword Scar Abyss, Li Chuanyi stood there. Every day, when he was free, he would come over to take a look. Ever since Li Fengmu went to the Flowing Cloud Realm, he gradually began to take over some matters in the Sword Heart Realm with the support and help of his elders. No one knew if Bai Jian was dead or alive after entering the Sword Scar Abyss, and among the younger generation, only Li Chuanyi stood out and became a martial emperor expert. Therefore, everyone understood in their hearts that no matter if it was his background or his natural talent, nobody could surpass him. Choosing Li Chuanyi to be the future sword master seemed to be the best choice. However, Li Chuanyi himself was not very accepting of his current position, because he felt that the position of sword master should belong to his senior brother, Bai Jian, and his talent was the strongest existence in the Sword Heart Realm. Not to mention the distant past. Just in the Battle of the Western Plains, he broke through at the last minute and killed several experts of the same level with a single sword strike. Unfortunately, because of that slash, Bai Jian failed to break through and walked on the path of decline. Of course, Li Chuanyi did not believe that his senior brother would not be able to recover from this setback. That genius who had stunned the 3,000 small worlds was only temporarily dispirited. One day he would return. Li Chuanyi was even more convinced of this. As the sun set, an old man floated over. He also stared at the abyss below, and his expression became much more solemn. Have you seen anything these days?" The old man smiled and stroked his breathing. Li Chuanyi did not bow. He only scratched his head guiltily and said, "Ancestor, I'm a little slow. I didn't see anything strange." It would be strange if you could see anything. Since ancient times, how many sages have entered the Sword Scar Abyss, but how many have come out? Even if they came out, most of them would be unable to recover from the setback. Even the people in the situation could not see through it. It would be strange if you could see some clues standing outside the high wall. As Li Fengmu spoke, he also laughed loudly. In the past, Li Fengmu had also thought of entering the Sword Scar Abyss, but this idea was quickly dismissed. This was because he wanted to wait until Bai Jian could take over the flag in his hand before going. However, he did not expect that Bai Jian would go in first. Rumor had it that the Sword Scar Abyss had a monstrous opportunity that could change a person's fate. However, who could say for sure? After all, these were things that could not be seen or touched. However, the fates of all the sword cultivators who entered the Sword Scar Abyss were indeed changed. However, they never returned, or they never had a future. Don't even think about going down to pull your senior brother out. Think about your own capabilities. Don't get yourself into trouble again, Li Fengmu said. Li Chuanyi lowered his head in shame. It was as if his thoughts had been seen through. Li Fengmu didn't say anything else. He silently looked into the abyss. The Sword Scar Abyss was a mysterious place that countless cultivators of the Sword Heart Realm wanted to figure out. However, no one succeeded. Many people were scared out of their wits and didn't dare to try again. In fact, even Bai Jian's decision to go to the Sword Scar Abyss by himself seemed to be an act of self-abandonment in the eyes of many people. Although it was indeed somewhat meaningful, if he could find an opportunity, perhaps the situation would change. In the Sword Scar Abyss, it was pitch black. Bai Jian laid on the ground with a pained expression. There was no sun or moon in the mountains, so Bai Jian did not know how long he had been in the Sword Scar Abyss. During this period, he had experienced countless pains. In particular, the further he walked, the more pain he would have to endure. Most of the pain came from the coldness and loneliness. This place was especially strange, especially the evil aura that was emitted. It made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Fortunately, Bai Jian felt a sword intent when he walked until now. Just as he was wild with joy, the sword intent had already pierced through his head. Therefore, Bai Jin fell. He only felt that the world was spinning, and the things that he had experienced in his life kept appearing in his mind. Whether it was happiness, anger, sorrow, joy, or ambition, his feelings were complicated, like tangled hemp. Am I going to die here? Such a thought appeared in Bai Jin's mind. In the next moment, he also felt an intense pain coming like a tide. It was stronger than the previous, as if it was about to surpass his limit. Even Bai Jin's will started to become blurry because of it. In the God realm, as the news of Princess Mingju's return spread, many people became very excited. They wanted to see the most extraordinary woman in the 3,000 small worlds. However, they only heard the news, and no one had seen the figure of the extraordinary woman. Instead, it was the triumphant return of Shan Luo, Shin Fian, and the others that made countless people view them as heroes. Everyone was well aware of the general situation, and the great victory of this war also made the people of the God realm very proud. They felt that with such a great army, it was impossible for the outside world to break through their defense line. After Emperor Qin returned, the 3 kings and 1 Qing also started another discussion. It was rumored that it was extremely serious, but in the end, no news was spread. This made many people start to guess and try to figure it out. For a time, it could be said that there were many different opinions, but no one believed it. However, the people involved acted as if nothing had happened, and did not mention a word about that discussion. Most of the garrison returned to the God realm to visit family, which made the huge flowing cloud realm seem a little lonely. Even Ji Fei returned to the Sun Snow realm to visit family, because they all knew that this might be the last time they could relax. Once they missed it, they might not have another chance in the future. The peace before the Great War made people feel uneasy. Or maybe it was because many martial emperors had fallen in the flowing cloud realm. The luck did not spread, and many good news came from the flowing cloud realm. Chu Taiying had successfully broken through and stepped into the 2nd-level martial emperor. A few days later, Qian Guangqi also broke through the shackles of King Wu and became the 2nd martial emperor of the younger generation. For example, Arctic Gray Feather, Old Master Shao, and the others, their strength had more or less increased. The most shocking one was Mo Guan19, whose cultivation had reached the peak and was half a step away from the martial emperor realm. Many good news came out one after another, and the flowing cloud realm seemed to be welcoming another great explosion. With regards to these changes, Xiaoyang was naturally aware of them. It was even to the extent that he'd selected a few very good seedlings from amongst them. If they were properly nurtured, then perhaps they would become the pillars of the drift cloud world in a 12+ years. Fortunately, these good seedlings were all nurtured by the North Light City, the Extreme Yang sect and the Extreme Yin sect, so their future would not be delayed. Suddenly, Xiaoyang raised his eyebrows and a smile appeared on his face, and he said, "They're back." Chapter 2384. Being able to sense the existence of the spirit of the world. The smile on Xiaoyang's face became wider. During this period of time, because he didn't know what had happened, this made him very worried. Even if Xiaoyang wanted to help, he could only give up because he did not know what had happened. After waiting for so long, there was finally news. How could he not be excited? Moreover, the world spirit and the development of the drifting cloud world were closely related. Without it, many things would become troublesome. Even though Xiaoyang could now completely control the drifting cloud world, there was still a limit to what he could do. At the end of the day, he was just a possessor. He was not born with the world spirit. "I haven't heard from you for a long time. What happened?" Xiaoyang sighed and asked anxiously. If there had not been a major change, the world spirit naturally would not have disappeared without a trace. Therefore, something big must have happened for this to happen. It could even be said that the world spirit had most likely encountered a great threat, which was why it had disappeared to protect itself. In the blink of an eye, the stars in front of Xiaoyang's eyes had already changed. What entered his eyes was a woman in a white dress in the starry sky. That was the true body of the world spirit. It seemed that because its strength had increased, its physical body looked more like a person. Until now, Xiaoyang could feel that the world spirit was deliberately suppressing its aura. At this point, it was impossible for him to believe that nothing had happened. However, what kind of huge change had happened? It was still worth pondering and considering. You may need to use less of the world spirit recently. Even if it is not necessary, try not to use it as much as possible. The stronger your cultivation, the less you need to use it. The world spirit said indifferently. Hearing that, a trace of uneasiness flashed through Xiaoyang's heart. Although the world spirit did not say it, Xiaoyang could already imagine that the drifting cloud world was being targeted again. In the end, it was the world spirit that was being targeted. It was originally one with the flowing cloud realm. If something happened to it, then when the nest was overturned, how could any egg remain intact? Just from this brief information, Xiaoyang was able to analyze a lot of problems. All of this caused him to fall into deep thought once more. The current flowing cloud world could really be said to be filled with both internal and external troubles. Under such circumstances, wanting to reverse the situation was truly a headache. In fact, this was something that was difficult to achieve. The world spirit just watched in silence because it couldn't think of a way to satisfy both sides. It could be said that the lack of strength was the biggest limitation. No matter how many methods they had, if they did not have the ability to put them to use, everything would become empty talk and meaningless. As such, the world spirit was powerless when it came to these matters. Moreover, in this long period of time, there were too many things that made people helpless. Even if you have heaven-defying talent in a bad situation, you can only die with hatred. The world spirit also wanted its world to prosper step by step. But to do all of this was easier said than done. Therefore, to completely eliminate all of these problems was not an easy thing to do. Out of all of these, things would not go as planned. Who the hell is targeting you? And what can I do? Xiaoyang asked in a low voice. Even though he knew the enemy was powerful, it was not someone Xiaoyang could fight against right now. But he couldn't just not know anything. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Therefore, only after knowing who the enemy was, could he come up with a reasonable battle plan. Or rather, it was a target. If he had known nothing about it all this time, then it would be an extremely terrifying thing. In the end, if he didn't do anything when disaster was about to hit him, only death would await him. Even if he couldn't fight against them in the end, he had to be prepared to fight. After all, who knows, he might be able to find a sliver of opportunity in this battle. Even if he died, he had to know the reason. The world spirit raised its head and looked at Xiaoyang. There was some worry between its brows. Obviously, there was nothing it could do about this. Actually, you don't have to be so pessimistic. You just have to deal with the current situation. That's enough, the world spirit said helplessly. This made Xiaoyang even more speechless. There was no point in hiding things like this. Looking at its expression, it didn't seem like it was going to tell him about this. At that moment, Xiaoyang was truly speechless. Since they had signed a contract and became a symbiotic existence, it was not right for them to hide things from each other. On the contrary, if he kept trying to figure out these things, it would make him even more worried. However, Xiaoyang hadn't given up on this idea. He was still trying to figure it out. He felt that as long as he thought about it carefully, he would be able to find some clues. After all, it hadn't been long since the flowing cloud boundary became a medium boundary. Moreover, the number of people who knew about its existence could be counted on one hand. Very soon, Xiaoyang thought of Baiwuxi because he was the only one who had sensed the world spirit's existence. Moreover, he had even attacked. If Xiaoyang hadn't discovered it in time, this matter would have become very difficult to deal with if it had been blown up. Luckily, he had killed Baiwuxi, so this secret was naturally buried in the ground. However, very soon, Xiaoyang thought of another possibility, which was whether Bai Wuxi would spread this news before he died. Once this news was leaked, it would be an extremely heavy blow to the flowing cloud boundary. However, it was very peaceful now, and there were no almighties from other worlds that had invaded. As such, whether or not this news was leaked was still to be investigated. As such, it was hard to say what the situation was. Moreover, there were too many uncertainties in this aspect. Since Bai Wuxi knew the importance of this matter, he definitely wouldn't spread it easily. Even if he did, he would spread it back to his clan. However, when the White Bear tribe invaded last time, they didn't express such an attitude. Suddenly, Xiaoyang raised his eyebrows. He suddenly thought of another possibility. Could it be Su Changtian? Xiaoyang sucked in a breath of cold air and said in shock. This was the most likely possibility he thought of. Chapter 2385. Among the many possibilities, this was the only reasonable conclusion that Xiaoyang felt. This was because, according to his memory, only Bai Wuxi and Su Changtian knew about the world spirit. Now that Bai Wuxi had been killed, the remaining Su Changtian had a high possibility of being the world spirit. Moreover, the world spirit had only killed one of his clones in the Middle Mountains. At that time, the world spirit had said that his original body had ascended. Therefore, after ascending, he would naturally come to the 3,000 middle worlds. After hearing this name, the world spirit's body shook. Obviously, he was right. That was why it had such a reaction. After getting the answer, Xiaoyang sighed silently. Su Changtian was a figure from tens of thousands of years ago. If he was still alive, he would definitely be an old monster. Moreover, lifespan was often linked to cultivation. Therefore, it was difficult to estimate how powerful Su Changtian was now. Thinking about this, Xiaoyang could not help but feel a headache. If Su Changtian was still alive, then he would definitely become a great enemy. Even if the Four-Realm Alliance went all out, they would not be a match for him alone. When the difference in cultivation level was too great, there would be an immeasurable difference in strength. By then, even if they joined forces, they would not be able to do anything to him. If that was really the case, Xiaoyang really had a headache. It seemed that this matter was not simple. It would be very difficult to settle it. In fact, it could be said that it was almost impossible. Thinking about this, Xiaoyang felt even more helpless. It was not an exaggeration to say that the flowing cloud world was suffering from internal and external troubles. Not only was there the threat of the myriad beast world, but there were also traders of this world eyeing them covetously. In this way, it would be extremely difficult to survive this storm no matter how one looked at it. As a result, Xiaoyang had no choice but to think more about this matter. After all, once these things started to happen, even he would not be able to stop it. There were so many accidents that it was enough to make people sigh helplessly. In fact, even more people would lose their lives under such circumstances. Indeed, when I helped you in Caesar Grotto Heaven, I sensed his presence, the world spirit said with lingering fear. Since some things had already been revealed, there was no need to continue hiding it. Even if you continue to hide it, I'm afraid it won't make much sense. In fact, it might even arouse suspicion. Since he had already guessed the whole story, he naturally had to make it clear now so that he wouldn't make a wrong judgment because of his imagination. Once such a situation occurred, this matter would become extremely terrifying. Even the consequences would be difficult to bear. Therefore, there were some issues that needed to be communicated in a timely manner so that both sides could understand each other. This was the only way they could cooperate well and avoid any major mishaps. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. As expected, it was not much different from what he had guessed. It was just that thinking about it made him feel a little uncomfortable. The matter had been confirmed, but because of the strength of the unknown threat, it was enough to make one feel depressed. Moreover, in a logical deduction, it was enough to understand many things. Xiaoyang also felt a headache. After all, facing the unknown threat, he was still a little worried. With Su Changtian's character, once he found the flowing cloud world, he would probably make a move on the world spirit directly. At that time, how to protect it would become the #1 problem. You don't have to worry too much. Su Changtian did not discover us. It's just that I felt his presence first, so I hid at the first moment to avoid being discovered by him. The world spirit sighed. Because of the war before, the world spirit had become very cautious. Even if there was the slightest movement, it would hide at the first moment to ensure its own safety. As long as there was a spirit, it would have the consciousness to protect itself. Especially after going through so many things, the world spirit of the flowing cloud world had become even more careful and cautious. Otherwise, if the calamity of that year happened again, the world spirit would probably collapse directly. Then this world would naturally not be spared, and it would gradually decline. After receiving the world spirit's reply, Xiao Yang's heart calmed down a little. If he could delay the time, it would naturally be the best choice. Moreover, as time passed, he would become stronger and stronger. In fact, if he had more time, he might even be able to compete with Su Changtian. As for whether he would succeed or not, it was a little hard to say. After all, the world was unpredictable, and no one could say what kind of changes would happen. Although Su Changtian and I have already terminated the contract, it's inevitable that we still have some contact. So, when you use the power of the world in the future, try to be more careful. As long as he doesn't sense our presence, we'll be safe. The world spirit said softly. It could be said that this was the only way to protect himself, to prevent himself from being exposed as much as possible. However, how effective this method would be was still a big problem, and no one could say for sure. Xiao Yang nodded solemnly. If he didn't use the power of the world, it would probably be difficult to deal with an opponent like Bai Xingyun. If it wasn't a last resort, why would Xiao Yang use the power of the world? The power of the world was ultimately an external force to Xiao Yang. However, if he wanted to protect the flowing cloud world, he had no choice but to do so. I understand, it seems like we were still a little careless in coming to the middle world. Xiao Yang smiled bitterly. It could be said that the flowing cloud world's strength wasn't enough to be promoted to a middle world. It was entirely because Xiao Yang forcefully brought this world to a height that didn't belong to him with his own strength. Reaching such a height naturally meant that he had to bear the corresponding risks. Therefore, Xiao Yang couldn't help but feel a little troubled. Since he had made a promise, he had to fulfill it. It was impossible for him to abandon the flowing cloud world and leave alone. It was also because of such a promise that Xiao Yang had to bear all these things. The world spirit looked at the young man in front of him, and a trace of brilliance appeared in his eyes. Because from the beginning, although this young man appeared to be depressed, he didn't show any signs of betraying and protecting himself. Chapter 2386. And that made the world spirit very happy. Previously, because it made a contract with Su Changtian, it was severely injured and had to sleep for 10,000 years. Even his own world was affected by it, and it was constantly weakening. However, the young man in front of him had slowly mended that broken world. Even now, it was blooming with flowers, and there were even signs of it surpassing the previous prosperity. Even at the end of the day, knowing that the opponent it was facing was extremely terrifying, it never had the intention to retreat. It was as if as long as he was still alive, anyone who wanted to lay their hands on the flowing cloud world would have to step over him first. With this person standing there, it was enough to make people feel extremely at ease. It was as if as long as he was there, everything would become a non-issue. In fact, he could even rely on his strength to go further. The more the world spirit thought about it, the wider the smile on its face became. To be able to find such a person to work with, it could be said to be great luck. Those that had suffered in the past seemed to be somewhat insignificant now. Maybe I'm overthinking. After all, the world in the 3,000 middle worlds is many times bigger than a small world. It's very far away, and I haven't contacted him for tens of thousands of years. Whether or not I'll be discovered is unknown. The world spirit said with a smile. The unknowns in this matter made them very worried. Sometimes Under a coincidence, the uncertainties of the unknown would bring disaster to them. Therefore, it was naturally right to be a little more restrained. Only then could they avoid many unnecessary troubles. That's true, but these uncertain things, who can say for sure? Moreover, if one's luck is bad, even drinking cold water will get stuck. Xiao Yang said helplessly. The world spirit rolled its eyes at this young man, and its expression looked a little unhappy. However, that wasn't something rare. As the world spirit, it could feel the life trajectory of anyone. Even strong people choked to death by a mouthful of cold water. Since ancient times there were many. Although they were only ordinary people, they were no different from ordinary people in front of a powerhouse. I'm curious now. Can you sense what realm Su Changtian is in now? Xiao Yang frowned slightly and asked with anticipation. If he could know Su Changtian's cultivation and control all the information in his hands, there was still a chance and possibility to come up with a battle plan. As for whether he could succeed in the future, he could only do his best and leave it to fate. The world spirit shook its head and said, I can't say for sure. Back then, I only sensed his existence in this world, so I had to conceal my aura to avoid being discovered. Hearing that, Xiao Yang was helpless. In that case, the world spirit's injury back then was indeed very terrifying. Otherwise, why would it be so terrified? Therefore, many problems. There was no need to keep holding on to it. The world spirit thought for a while and said, however, according to my speculation, he is probably only a short distance away from the next realm. Moreover, that was the world spirit's, a conservative estimate. Back then, Su Changtian's talent wasn't bad either. His cultivation speed was even faster than Xiao Yang's. Then he even plundered and took away half of the flowing cloud boundary's fate. It wasn't a strange thing that he took advantage of that to reach the top. Hearing such an answer, even Xiao Yang felt a headache coming on. In that case, the next thing would be really difficult to deal with. Even if he wanted to solve it, it would be very difficult. So many things made people feel helpless. If you have problems with your mental state because of this, that would be the scariest thing, the world spirit suddenly said. Hearing that, Xiao Yang was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed bitterly. That was indeed the case. Sometimes, if one was too worried, it would cause problems with one's mental state. Although Xiao Yang thought that he did a good job in controlling it, he naturally had to avoid it if he could. If you keep probing on that line, I'm afraid that you won't even know when you've crossed it. During this period of time, I will do my best to help you. As for how far we can go, it will depend on our luck, the world spirit said. Xiao Yang heard that and nodded helplessly. Although Xiao Yang had many paths to choose from, since this path was blocked, he could choose to take a detour. However, the flowing cloud boundary was different. Existing here was like a live target. After talking for a while, Xiao Yang returned to his small courtyard again. Now he was really having a headache. How should he solve this matter? It had become a huge cloud of doubt in his heart. After all, there were many things that weren't as simple as a few words. Moreover, this was related to the life and death of a world. How could Xiao Yang be careless? He even had to be careful and cautious in every place. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Not long after, Xiao Yang handed over his Thunderfire Divine sword to the spirit of the world, allowing it to use the power of the world to refine it and increase its grade even faster. The world spirit was more clear-headed now. It also understood that only when Xiao Yang became stronger, he would have the power to spare to protect the flowing cloud boundary. Sometimes an all-round development couldn't be compared to a person reaching the peak. Most of the time, Xiao Yang would stay in the Earth's core and use the Earth's core fire to temper his physical body. As for the fate that was gathered, the world spirit gave most of it to Xiao Yang after distributing it. With such a huge amount of fate, how far he could go still depended on his luck. If his realm was lower, it was enough to use the fate to raise his realm by a few realms, to the extent of advancing by leaps and bounds. However, if he wanted to create a martial emperor, the amount of fate needed was immeasurable. Therefore, under such circumstances, what the world spirit could do was to advance step by step and give as much help as possible. In addition, Xiaoyang knew his own limits. Therefore, the world spirit wasn't worried at all whether it would be pulling the seedlings to help them grow. Sometimes it was easy to do bad things with good intentions. It was also because of this that the world spirit mostly helped those who lacked fate but had sufficient strength. This was also the reason why the flowing cloud boundaries cultivators didn't explode when the world spirit collected so much fate. Chapter 2387. After thinking about these problems, Xiaoyang knew that he didn't have much time left to enjoy. Therefore, the only thing he could do was to continuously grow stronger. As for the unknown danger, he could only temporarily put it to the back of his mind. Since it hadn't come yet, he could still worry and prepare, but he couldn't lose his composure because of it. Moreover, Su Changtian might never find out that the flowing cloud boundary had arrived at the 3,000 middle worlds. Therefore, amidst the many uncertainties, it was enough to know that there was such a threat. As for the other things, no matter how much he thought about it, he wouldn't be able to come to a conclusion. Because Xiaoyang was the only one who knew about this, the flowing cloud realm was still the same. After experiencing the war with the White Bear tribe, many people felt the terror of war again. Most people began to focus on cultivation. After all, if you wanted to protect what you wanted to protect, you could only do it if you were strong enough. Otherwise, you would be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. In the end, you could only depend on others. Therefore, during this period of time, perhaps because of the awakening of the world's spirit, the cultivators in the Kingwu realm experienced another explosion. Many cultivators began to improve by leaps and bounds. Among them, there were even some who displayed their talents. Recently, the most outstanding person was a genius from the solar sect. After breaking through to the martial emperor realm, he continued to break through 3 layers in a row, becoming a legend of the drifting cloud realm, an unprecedented case. However, no matter how strong Xiaoyang was, he had walked up step by step. There had never been a record of someone breaking through 3 realms in one night. When this news reached Mu Yang's ears, he was overjoyed. He directly took the disciple in and prepared to personally train him. Many people even predicted that this genius would become the top figure in the extreme Yang sect in the future. In fact, he would even suppress the brilliance of the geniuses of the younger generation. Although that genius was only at the 3rd level of the Kingwu realm, he couldn't contribute much under such circumstances. However, things might be different in the future if they were given time. As such, this kind of talent was quite precious. Moreover, if he continued like this, it was possible that he could catch up to Xiaoyang in the future. During this period of time, this genius from the extreme Yang sect had become the topic of many people's conversations. In response to this, the various forces all went to congratulate him. Only the Northern Light City gave the most gifts. Many people thought that the Northern Light City would try to snatch this genius, but this didn't happen, which made people feel quite confused. As such, some people who had their own plans began to make their moves. Xiaoyang's achievements were indeed unparalleled, but he was still in existence of the older generation after all. By the time he went there, perhaps that genius would have already matured and would completely suppress the Northern Light City. Due to this reason, the extreme Yang sect would become the second leader's leader. As such, from now on, some people sighed. In the end, even though those people's plans were quite good, they were all chased out by Mu Yang. The reason why Mu Yang chased away those who came to express their goodwill was very simple. His disciples were currently focused on their cultivation and quickly improving their cultivation. If they were disturbed by these worldly matters, their mental state would be clouded and all their efforts would be for naught. Because of the appearance of such a genius, Mu Yang was overjoyed. He had always felt that he could not compare to Xiaoyang, and now he finally had a disciple who could surpass him. This was a wonderful thing. Xiaoyang had only heard about these things, and he did not care much about them. As for taking in disciples, Xiaoyang did not have such thoughts. After all, he only had so much energy, and he could not take care of everything. On this day, Xiaoyang was sitting on a rattan chair in the small courtyard that already looked old. He seemed to be waiting for something, and he looked quite expectant, because today was the end of the 1-month period he had agreed to with Princess Mingzhu. He wanted to know if she could reach a higher level. Once she did, the threat of the Wanshou realm would be alleviated, and they would not have to worry about being wiped out. As long as their alliance with the Flame realm was good enough, the Wanshou realm would not have so much energy to deal with them. Moreover, this was the most important thing right now. Suddenly, Xiaoyang's brows twitched, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. In the next moment, a little girl rushed out, cheering in front of Xiaoyang. Young master, I've successfully condensed a spiritual vein and become a 9th order King Wu. Can I go to battle with you? Xiaoman smiled very happily and excitedly. In the battle with the White Bear tribe, Xiaoman felt a little guilty for not being able to fight alongside Xiaoyang. It was all because she was not strong enough, which was why she could not go to battle and would become a burden. But now, she had reached the requirements to go to battle. On the other hand, Xiaoyang restrained his joy and said, "No." Lil Man's face instantly darkened when he heard this answer. She couldn't understand why this was the case. However, she did not dare to disobey her young master's orders. The reason Xiaoyang did not agree was very simple. Xiaoman was not a simple warrior, nor did he treat her as a servant. He had never treated her as a maidservant and had long treated her as his own younger sister. As a result, Xiaoyang would do his best to protect his sister, who had walked to the peak of the drifting cloud world with him from the beginning through hardship. Xiaoman pouted, "Why can't I?" "You're my servant, so everyone naturally has high expectations for you. If you go out with this little bit of strength, wouldn't you be dragging down my prestige?" Xiaoyang pondered for a while and spoke nonsense with a serious face. When Xiaoman heard that, she seemed to believe it and said guiltily, "Young master, I'm sorry. I'm too stupid." At that moment, Xiaoyang did not know whether to laugh or to cry. Very soon, a piece of news came, which made Xiaoyang's face turn even uglier. He did not receive news from Princess Mingzhu today, but he received some blind information. Chapter 2388. The news from left blind and right blind would never be good news in such a situation. Therefore, Xiaoyang felt helpless. He thought he would receive good news today, but he didn't expect it to be bad news. He couldn't help but feel a headache. What should come would come in the end. Even if you wanted to avoid it, there was nowhere to run. Therefore, no matter what the news was, Xiaoyang could only accept it calmly. Then he would organize the information and come up with a plan. At least he had fought for so long and done so much. He couldn't just watch the flowing cloud world fall. Therefore, he still had great ambitions and thought about many things. That was to ensure the safety of this place. After reading the news from left blind and right blind, Xiaoyang's expression became more serious. The White Bear tribe had already spread the news of the flowing cloud world. They also clearly stated that they wouldn't send any more people. The reason he released this news was very simple. He wanted 10% of the profits after taking down the 4-realm alliance. The appearance of a new world made the Myriad Beast world even more excited. Many people even felt that this was a profitable business. If they could take it down, they would have the strength to crush the Flame world. However, the White Bear tribe also released more news. They used the strength of their entire tribe, but in the end, only a few lucky King Wu came back alive. Because of this, the Myriad Beast world calmed down a little. Those tribes that boasted that they could take down the flowing cloud world with the strength of one tribe were also done for. However, this didn't mean that the Myriad Beast world would give up on this plan. Some tribes had already started to move frequently. Obviously, their goal was very clear. They wanted to take down the 4-realm alliance and turn it into their own nutrients. Although the authenticity of left blind and right blind's information still needed to be verified, most of it was true. Therefore, there weren't too many suspicious points. What was going to happen was going to happen. Xiaoyang was helpless about this. However, he wasn't very clear about the specific situation. He could only let left blind and right blind continue to investigate. When Xiao Man saw her young master's expression suddenly become serious, she couldn't help but become absent-minded. Could it be that her unreasonable behavior had upset the young master? Thinking of this, Lil Man felt a little guilty. After such a long time, how could he still have the same temperament as before? When Xiao Yang returned to his senses and saw Xiao Man's self-reproach, he stood up and rubbed her head with a smile. Xiao Man, don't think too much. All you need to do now is to work hard on your cultivation. It was just a joke before, so don't take it to heart. What I am worried about is the survival of the flowing cloud realm. As he spoke, Xiao Yang felt a little powerless in his heart. If it was only the invasion of one tribe, he could really rely on the power of the world to fight. After many reversals, he could still withstand the attack. However, if it was the joint invasion of several clans, it would be more or less impossible for him to defend against it. That was why Xiao Yang was so upset. After all, manpower was limited. No one could say for sure how many changes would happen in the future. Therefore, he could only feel absent-minded and helpless. Xiao Man nodded heavily. Xiao Man understands. As long as the young master wasn't angry at her, Xiao Man felt that it was nothing. However, she still felt a little sorry for the young master. The pressure that he was under was too much, and she couldn't share it with him. I'm going to the God Realm. Tell Sun Dishing and Mu Yang to be on guard. Don't let anything go wrong. Xiao Yang said softly. Xiao Man nodded immediately. She knew that the matter was probably very serious. That was why the young master was going to the God Realm. After explaining these matters, Xiao Yang directly went to the God Realm. This was such an important piece of information, so he had to make it clear to them. Moreover, it would be good for them to discuss a countermeasure. Only then could they make sufficient preparations to ensure the safety of the Four-Realm Alliance. If the situation changed, no matter which world became the breakthrough, it wouldn't be a small piece of news to the other worlds. They might even fall completely because of it. At the same time, Xiao Yang used his own methods to inform Li Fengmu and Luo Ji. As the main characters, they naturally needed to discuss it together. Xiao Yang only cared about two things. Firstly, they had to be in a high position and keep their word. Secondly, they had to be smart enough to come up with a good plan. The former was the easiest condition to fulfill. However, the latter was a little more difficult. Because no matter how smart you were, if you didn't come into contact with the relevant matters, it would be difficult to achieve anything. Therefore, sometimes one only needed to have some hope, and that was enough. Sword Heart World. After Li Fengmu received the information from Xiao Yang, he couldn't help but frown. I didn't expect that after just a month of peace, a new wave would surge up again. Li Fengmu laughed bitterly at himself. Originally, they thought that this great victory would buy them a long time to recuperate. However, this was just wishful thinking. However, these words were indeed a little wishful thinking. They had only damaged the vitality of the White Bear tribe, not the entire beast realm. It could even be said that the strength of the beast realm was already terrifying. For the current them, it was a behemoth that was difficult to shake. It's just a peaceful life in our imagination. Facing the fierce beast realm, how can we be safe if we don't completely defeat those beasts? Li Chuanyi, who was sitting by the side, said with a smile. These days, Li Chuanyi also learned a lot from his ancestor. At the same time, his vision also underwent a great change. Moreover, Li Chuanyi also saw the many twists and turns in it. Moreover, he also had the temperament to lead the Sword Heart world. Although, occasionally, there were people who missed the jade-faced man. However, when the person left, the tea cooled down and more people sighed with regret. If it wasn't for the battle in the West Plains, he was afraid that he would still be in existence in the limelight and might even become the next sword master. It was just a pity that the world made fools of people. No one thought that such a situation would occur. After that, he entered the Sword Scar Abyss. In the eyes of many people, that was him giving up on himself and cutting off his last bit of hope. Since then, the Sword Heart world no longer had a jade-faced man. Chapter 2389. After arriving in the God Realm, Xiaoyang stayed in the king's residence as usual. Unrivaled God and Yang Sun were still the ones who entertained him. As for the king, he had been dealing with government affairs in the palace for almost a year because he had too many things on his plate. He had not been back for a long time. While they were chatting, Xiaoyang also thought of that mischievous little girl. Unfortunately, there was still no news of her until now. Moreover, he had no idea what her current situation was like. All of this became a mystery in everyone's hearts. Although they believed that the little girl was still alive, the bitterness in their hearts was endless. Even if Ziying was still alive, so what? After staying in the tomb of the god of sin for so long, who could guarantee that they would be able to escape unscathed? This was a very cruel problem. No matter how capable one was, it would be difficult to resist the invasion of the death aura. As for Ji Fei being able to walk out alive, that was a complete anomaly. Many conditions had to be met in order for that to happen. If Ji Fei had not sealed his god soul back, then to retain a trace of consciousness and prevent the death aura from invading him, he would have become an undead long ago. Moreover, Ji Fei's greatest fortune was meeting Xiaoyang, who gave him a chance to be reborn. Whether Ziying would be able to meet someone like Xiaoyang when the tomb of the god of sin opened the next time was a big question. Furthermore, some people even thought that it was somewhat unrealistic. Therefore, with so many harsh conditions, many people thought that it was completely impossible. Xiaoyang could only sigh silently about this. He felt that these things were indeed difficult to predict. On the second day, everyone had arrived one after another. Xiaoyang and Unrivaled God also got up and headed to the palace. Inside the carriage, Unrivaled God was still as lazy as ever. It was as if he did not care about the upcoming battle at all. Or it could be said that he had always been a sloppy person. This was the state that Unrivaled God enjoyed the most. This way, his state of mind could be placed in the most peaceful place. At the same time, he could also rely on this to keep himself in good condition. This time, the Wanshou realm is ready to make a move. Looks like a disaster is about to befall us. Unrivaled God was still smiling as if he would not feel anything even if the sky were to fall. This was Unrivaled God, who had always been able to maintain a very strange state. Xiaoyang only nodded. Along the way, he had thought of many possibilities, but in the end he could only dismiss these thoughts. After all, how could there be so much luck in this world? Sometimes this kind of wishful thinking could be fatal poison to them. Therefore, in the face of war, it was not about planning for the best. Instead, it was about preparing for the worst and calculating whether or not one could withstand it. Many of the algorithms involved were even more troublesome. Is there still no news from Princess Mingzhu? Xiaoyang asked. Of course. Xiaoyang was not blind to this question. He was trying to determine whether Princess Mingzhu had succeeded or how far she had progressed based on the flow of her aura. Unrivaled God shook his head and said, At least for now, the aura inside has not changed at all. Even the luck is as usual. At that moment, Xiaoyang smiled helplessly and shook his head. He had thought that Princess Mingzhu's attempt would give them a way out. However, now it seemed that this idea was still a little premature. Even though Princess Mingzhu was blessed with luck, it was almost impossible for her to break through to the next level in such a short period of time. If a miracle happened, it would be a miracle. If she failed, they could only fight to the death. There's still no news from the God Emperor, even now, Unrivaled God continued. As a result, Xiaoyang's expression turned even uglier. The God Emperor had been in closed-door cultivation for a long time. It could be said that the core of the strategy that had been formulated from the beginning was him. However, since there had been no news, this heavy burden had fallen on Princess Mingzhu's shoulders. It seemed that both father and daughter liked to fight to the death. Therefore, there had been no definite news until now. At that moment, Xiaoyang felt a slight headache. It seemed that it would not be easy to straighten things out at this point. The more he thought about it, the more bitter Xiaoyang felt. It seemed that many times the idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. Unrivaled God seemed to have noticed Xiaoyang's helplessness and worry. He immediately shut his mouth and did not dare to continue. The situation that seemed to be going well had now turned into a stalemate. It seemed that many people were trapped in it and could not extricate themselves. The carriage sped along, and soon they arrived at the palace. The armored guards who were stationed at the palace now had a drastic change in their views. Their eyes were filled with admiration. There was even a silver-armored warrior who mocked himself. Back then, he had looked down on this outsider. However, as time passed, he was still standing here. But Xiaoyang had become the leader of a region. He was now the hero of the Four-Realm Alliance. After all, the rumors in the past were just rumors. The truth had revealed many problems. At least now, no one would think that Xiaoyang was unworthy of Princess Mingzhu and that he was a toad lusting after a swan. A short while later, Xiaoyang arrived at the meeting hall that had been set up long ago under unrivaled God's guidance. Sit down and wait for a while. Luoji is far away. I'm afraid it'll take the time it takes for an incense stick to burn to arrive, the king said as he gestured with his hand. Xiaoyang did not stand on ceremony and sat down right away. Because the meeting hadn't started yet, everyone kept their mouths shut. They knew very well how important and serious this meeting was. This was a meeting that concerned the direction of the Four-Realm Alliance. They had to make all the calculations. It could be said that most of the core figures in this meeting were sitting here. Only the God Emperor's family had not come because they were cultivating in closed-door cultivation. However, their family had always been the backbone of the heavenly realm. Now that they were absent from the meeting, it felt like something was missing. The king was even more worried about this issue. He felt that it was difficult for him to shoulder such a heavy responsibility. As time passed, everyone's level grew higher and higher. However, he seemed to be stuck in the same place. More importantly, as the decision-maker, it was difficult for him to play a vital role. Chapter 2390. After Luo Ji's arrival, the king immediately activated the formation to isolate the room from the outside world. This was to prevent the news from spreading and causing unnecessary panic. Furthermore, if some confidential information were to spread, the more people there would be, the more likely it would no longer be a secret. Instead, it would leak the information. None of them went to exchange greetings or talk nonsense. They directly asked Xiaoyang to tell them all the information he knew. After everyone found out that the Wanshou realm was ready to attack, their faces turned ugly. The White Bear tribe had 2 4th-level martial emperors. This meant that the other tribes also had 4th-level martial emperors. Furthermore, the number of 4th-level martial emperors was not small. Even though Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu had the ability to fight against 4th-level martial emperors, there were only 2 of them. Facing a large number of opponents, they would probably die under the siege. If they fell, it would be a huge blow to the Four-Realm Alliance. At the very least, this was not good news. Furthermore, the White Bear tribe still had a 5th-level martial emperor. It was just that he had not shown himself. If that almighty martial emperor were to make a move, the consequences would be unpredictable. Li Fengmu remained silent. He had thought it through. He was just a man with a sword. Even if he were to die, he would drag a few more down with him. However, what they were facing now was not a momentary dispute. It was an incomparably cruel war. Furthermore, as the backbone of the framework realm, once he fell, the consequences would be self-evident. It could even be said that they had to be extra careful with their every move. They had to reduce all possibilities to the minimum. This was the only way to ensure the safety of their world. Otherwise, no matter how much they did, it would be meaningless. Thinking about these problems, Li Fengmu felt a headache coming on. It seemed that no matter what, it would not be simple. It was even more meaningless if it was just wishful thinking. Everyone, if you have any countermeasures, why don't you share them? The king saw that everyone was silent and spoke up. Everyone just looked at each other. If they could really think of a solution, they would not be silent. It was precisely because he had no other choice that he chose to remain silent. As such, there were many problems that they could not solve. And this was the most unbearable part of it all. No matter how many schemes you have, there is always the possibility of failure. Of course, it was mostly because the difference in strength was too great that some good ideas and schemes could not be implemented. Everyone present was an overlord of a region. In the 3,000 small worlds, they were even more fearless. However, because they had seen too much, they knew how cruel this reality was. It wasn't that he didn't have a way, it was just that he wasn't strong enough to use it. Could it be that the fate of our 4 realms has come to an end? The king shook his head and smiled bitterly when he saw that no one said anything. After gaining a general understanding of the strength of the Wanshou realm, everyone was clear in their hearts that it was simply incomparable. Previously, when they were dealing with the White Bear tribe, they had already given it their all. What they needed to face next was an invasion from the entire myriad beast world. At that time, even if they gathered their strength, they would not be able to match up to them. As such, how could they feel good in their hearts? Therefore, with so many limitations, what they could do was even more pitiful. You can't say that. We can still ally with the Flame realm. If they can lend a hand, it's not impossible to defend, Jiang Zhangqing said. Now, the only thing they could think of was the only path left behind by the Emperor God. Moreover, the Emperor God was also in seclusion for this goal. It was just that the heavens did not fulfill people's wishes, and it could not be implemented. King Zhao snorted in disdain and said, "Prime Minister, do you think that we are not dying fast enough? Without fighting strength that the enemy is wary of, are you sure you will bring an ally and not lead a wolf into the house?" The moment he said that, Jiang Zhangqing stopped talking. In fact, everyone was well aware of the current situation. They just did not say it out loud. Moreover, that was just wishful thinking. If it was the worst result, they would be digging their own graves. It was like opening the city gates and inviting the enemy in. Jiang Zhangqing was speechless. He was indeed holding on to a sliver of hope. Moreover, in his eyes, this was also the most feasible method. Since there is nothing we can do, we can only wait. Wait for the Emperor God to come out of seclusion. Wait for Princess Mingzhu to come out of seclusion. Luo Ji, who had been silent for a long time, said, "Needless to say, this was what everyone thought." Luo Ji's words did not end there. He continued, "Since the situation is so serious, let's make some choices. As long as we can protect the most important places, it's fine if we lose the other places. For us now, the most important thing is to preserve hope." Their own world was the only place to stay, so no one could say anything about giving up. Everyone was stunned for a moment, not understanding what he meant. For example, the newly built Pinnacle Victory Mountain in the Flowing Cloud Realm, the Heavenly Sword Mountain in the Sword Heart Realm, and the Divine Capital in the Divine Realm were all built with great effort. Therefore, the defenses of these places are naturally top-notch. Therefore, we can only withdraw all our forces to defend these important places. At least this way, we can still preserve a sliver of hope, Luo Ji said. As for the places outside of these places, they naturally could not protect them. King Da was silent. Everyone's expression was very ugly. If they completely gave up on the other places, how could these people protect themselves? They would be completely exposed to the weapons of the warriors of the myriad beast realm. Even if they succeeded, there would be very few people in the 4-realm alliance who could survive in the end. Perhaps not even 1 in 10,000 would survive. This was a rather extreme method. We can also let all our people leave and return after the disaster is over, Luo Ji said helplessly. At this moment, everyone was speechless. It seemed that this was the only way to deal with it. Although it seemed very cruel, it seemed to be the safest method at the moment, to ensure that the world would not be destroyed and the number of people would decrease. I just received news that because many tribes have invested too much in the Flame realm, it is very slow to mobilize people. We still have time. Chapter 2391. Xiaoyang had just received this news. From his point of view, this was an opportunity to turn the situation around. However, from this information, he could analyze many problems. The Wanshou realm's invasion this time was for real. They wanted to swallow the entire Four-Realm Alliance in one gulp. At that time, once they set out, it would be a very terrifying thing for the Four Realms Alliance. It was even possible that they would be destroyed because of this. In the face of absolute strength, all schemes would be useless, unable to withstand a single blow. However, it was also because of this that Xiaoyang felt there was still a chance. This was because the Wanshou realm's main force was involved in the Inflame realm. As such, if they wanted to mobilize their forces, they would need to think carefully. On one hand, they needed to suppress the Inflame realm so that they would not notice anything suspicious. On the other hand, they needed to secretly swallow the Four-Realm Alliance. However, they needed to be careful with every step. They could not make any noise. Everything had to be done after weighing the pros and cons. Moreover, they needed to concentrate their forces. Many things would need to be done slowly. As such, they would need to spend a lot of time. During this time, it would be a great opportunity for them to change. Moreover, if they could grasp it firmly, they might be able to achieve unexpected results. As such, during this so-called breathing period, what they were waiting for had to be done. At the same time, they needed to be on guard. After hearing this news, Luo Ji smiled bitterly and helplessly. However, my opinion is the worst plan. Unless it is absolutely necessary, we can't use it. Although Luo Ji's opinion was indeed the worst plan, it was also an extremely effective one. In fact, everyone present knew that if they used this method, they could still see a trace of hope. Once the battlefield became too large, it would definitely not be good news for them. Only Xiaoyang would not use this strategy. This was because there were simply too many places that he needed to defend. It would be difficult for him to take care of the front and back. If it was not for the fact that the secret of the world spirit could not be exposed, Xiaoyang would be happy to use this method. As long as he could defend Taste Victory Mountain or Borealis City, he would be able to grow quickly and repel all the invading enemies. However, even though this seemed like a good idea, given the current situation of the drifting cloud world, it was impossible to implement. After all, once the foundation was discovered, the consequences would be extremely terrifying. At that time, whether or not they would be able to continue would become a huge question. At the very least, Xiaoyang didn't dare to be ambiguous about this issue. The only thing he could do was to protect them with all his might. Therefore, during this period of time, we can continue to wait, Qin Wang said with a frown. Everyone present knew that such a wait was full of uncertainty, because when he arrived, there would be a glimmer of hope. If he couldn't wait, then the calamity would come at any time. In the face of such cruel reality, even if you were unwilling to face it, you still had to face it head-on. Furthermore, an idea was just an idea. There was no way to ensure the accuracy of every link. Perhaps if one was careless, they would fall into a bottomless abyss. Breaking through to the Martial Emperor realm was filled with too many uncertainties. Sometimes it felt like there was only a thin line separating them, but many people used tens of thousands of years to close the gap. As for what the God Emperor and Princess Mingzhu did, they were far from it. It could be said that they held their breath and forced themselves to do it, as if they were acting out of spite. If they succeeded, then they succeeded. If they failed, then there was nothing they could do. If there's no other way, then we'll take Brother Luo's suggestion, Li Fengmu said as he rubbed his forehead. Even if this method was the worst and not worth it, who could think of a better idea? There's no rush. We still have a lot of time to think. Therefore, there's no need to rush to a decision. This is just a choice we made because we had no other choice, Luo Ji said helplessly. Li Fengmu also laughed bitterly. However, there didn't seem to be a better idea than this. The restriction of strength was so cruel. It made people feel helpless, but there was no other way. I wonder if Lord Zhao's information is accurate. or if it's accurate down to the details. Suddenly, King Zhao thought of something and asked. At this moment, King Zhao also noticed a detail. Xiaoyang seemed to be able to predict many things. Therefore, there were many clues in this. Now, he was more curious about where this information came from and whether it was accurate or not. Li Fengmu subconsciously lowered his head. Although he also knew where this information came from, he didn't dare to say it out loud. Xiaoyang only smiled faintly and said, I only have a rough idea of this information. It's not accurate. King Zhao also softened when he heard this. If they could understand all the information in detail, then they could work on it from the details. They could even use it to do more things and barely protect themselves. However, after receiving this information, he also felt helpless. After all, how could there be so many good things in this world? As for what methods Xiaoyang had up his sleeves, King Zhao couldn't continue asking. After all, everyone had their own unique skills. Once they were completely exposed, it wouldn't necessarily be good news. Moreover, not everyone could be completely defenseless. King Da, on the other hand, kept scratching his head. He was extremely frustrated. Why couldn't he come up with a stable and effective method? If these problems could be solved, then the core members of the Four Realm Alliance wouldn't have to look at each other in dismay. Unrivaled God was the only one among them who remained nonchalant. It was as if the hammer was about to land on his head, but he still looked indifferent. It was as if all this had nothing to do with him. At this moment, Xiaoyang suddenly raised his head. He thought of another possibility. Although there were also many risks involved, it wouldn't be as frustrating as it was now. We don't actually have to put in so much effort to defend. We can also take the initiative to attack. Xiaoyang's expression became extremely serious. He didn't look like he was joking. Chapter 2392. After hearing Xiaoyang's words, everyone was stunned for a moment before they calmed down. On the other hand, Emperor Qin and Li Fengmu were deep in thought because they felt that it was a good idea. If they could execute it well, it might even have an unexpected effect. Moreover, as the weak side, blindly defending was like a slow death. It was meaningless. However, taking the initiative to attack was different. They could make the other side feel annoyed and even stop their army at a critical moment. This was a good idea. Thinking of this, Qin Wang's eyes shone brightly. It had to be said that this idea was very bold. Moreover, this idea was very abnormal. Due to their lack of power, their ideas were limited. With such a new understanding, they might be able to fight their way out by doing the exact opposite of what they were used to. As expected of you. Emperor Qin gave him a thumbs up and praised. Luo Rong frowned slightly and said, We can't even protect ourselves now. How can we take the initiative to attack? Jiang Zhongqing nodded in agreement. They didn't have the strength to fight at all. If they could, they didn't want to suffer like this. They didn't want to continue enduring this resentment. However, they had no choice because of the current situation. You guys are really stupid. We're taking the initiative to attack, not going all out. We just need to send out a few powerful people to create havoc in their world so that the Wanshou world can't focus on the Four Realm Alliance. If the people who go can make the entire Wanshou world hate them to the core and hunt them down, they might be able to divert the disaster. The king frowned. It was difficult for him to pass such a resolution. After all, this method was very risky. Although it would bring them more chances of survival compared to sitting around and waiting for death, it was too risky. Moreover, they needed to be more conservative in their current situation instead of taking the risk to attack. All of a sudden, everyone had different opinions, and it was difficult to unify them. Only Emperor Qin, who loved to fight, felt that Xiaoyang's suggestion was very good. No matter what you say, I'm prepared to go to the Wanshou world. Xiaoyang spoke again when he saw that everyone couldn't come to an agreement. Since things had already come to this point, there was naturally no reason to retreat. Therefore, it would be best if he could deal with it as soon as possible. Moreover, since he already had such a thought in his heart, It would be meaningless if he continued to hesitate. When Xiaoyang came up with such an idea, he had naturally thought it through carefully and weighed the pros and cons of it. Even if this method did not work, he could immediately escape and rush back to the flowing cloud realm. If his plan failed, it would definitely cause a lot of trouble and even waste a lot of time. However, he would only know if it would be effective after trying. If he kept thinking about defense, then he would really die a slow death. Therefore, Xiaoyang already had his own opinions under these prerequisites. As for the safety of the flowing cloud world, he could only entrust it to his allies. Seeing Xiaoyang's incomparably resolute attitude, everyone's expression could not help but become sluggish. It could be said that if the Emperor God did not come out of seclusion, then the ones who had the most right to speak were Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu. Xiaoyang, I think this matter needs to be considered more carefully. You're being a little rash. King De coughed and advised. In this meeting, it could be said that every decision was related to the future of the Four-Realm Alliance. Therefore, even the smallest details needed to be carefully discussed. Moreover, what Xiaoyang proposed was a huge strategy. It was a strategy that would affect the balance and defense of the Four-Realm Alliance. I agree with Brother Zhao's opinion. I'm willing to accompany him on this trip. King Qin immediately interrupted his second brother and said, King Zhao and the others rolled their eyes at this warlike king. No matter who it was who proposed to start a war, he would probably agree with both hands. Such a proposal without careful consideration and consideration would be fraught with countless risks. I've thought about it very clearly. Rather than waiting for death, it's better to charge in and kill. Who knows, we might even have a chance. If we can also make it difficult for the enemy's army to move, then my goal will be completely successful. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. It was definitely not an easy task to pin down the entire army. Although this is not the best plan, it can be considered an intermediate plan. This old man is also willing to accompany Lord Xiao. Li Fengmu pondered and smiled. During this period of time, Li Fengmu also felt sullen, especially when left blind and right blind caused trouble in the Sword Heart world. It gave him a headache. As long as they were hit, they would run away. They were like loaches that could not be caught. Both of you are ready to go. If I don't go, then I'll seem a little cowardly. It's just a risk. It's not worth mentioning. Luo Ji also expressed her attitude. For a moment, King Da and Jiang Zhangqing, who were guarding their position, were also embarrassed. Now, they could also imagine how strong Xiaoyang was in the Battle of Taste Victory Mountain to make the three of them follow him. However, the four of them were third-level martial emperors. They could be said to be the top combat power in the Four-Realm Alliance. If they left, then the Four-Realm Alliance would be in imminent danger. Moreover, this method of doing so was really somewhat unreasonable. King Qin, on the other hand, smiled as he looked at his former comrades who had fought side by side. Since everyone could be of one mind, then this matter would be easy to handle. For a moment, Xiaoyang's opinion could be said to be overwhelming. Since the strongest forces were standing on the same front, it was easy to imagine what the outcome would be. King Da also felt very powerless and helpless. Until now, he still wanted to stop such a crazy proposal. However, at this point, was it really something he could stop? Or should he take advantage of his seniority and use the power given to him by the Divine Emperor to directly deny it? Or was he trying to force Xiaoyang with his past relationship with Xiaoyang? King Da, on the other hand, looked at his eldest son for help, hoping that unrivaled God would stand up and say something. Little did he know that unrivaled God did not seem to care about this at all. Instead, he turned his head away. King Da was almost desperate now. He really could not understand why these young people were so warlike. You're not strong enough. You'll only be a burden to me if you go. Xiaoyang shook his head, looking very serious. Chapter 2393. As soon as he said that, the three of them almost spat out a mouthful of blood. What he said did not give them any face at all. He was being very direct. However, Li Fengmu and the others were not angry. They understood that Xiao Yang did not mean to look down on them when he said that. After all, Xiao Yang could single-handedly kill someone who was one level higher than him. But they could not. This was where the gap was, and they had to admit it. Moreover, I can only kill rank 4 martial emperors. If my level is higher, I can only run for my life. I might not even be able to take care of myself. What will you do when the time comes? Xiao Yang said very calmly. When everyone heard this, they immediately fell silent. This was because it was the truth. In the beast realm, there were many rank 4 martial emperors. Even the number of rank 5 martial emperors could not be counted on one hand. No matter which world it is, I won't be at ease without all of you guarding it, Xiao Yang said helplessly. If all of their top combatants were to charge out, then their own defenses would become very weak. If an accident happened, such as an army charging over, no one would be able to stop them. Therefore, they had to be even more cautious when thinking about these problems. Even if Xiao Yang's idea was very risky, there was still a possibility. If they were to stake everything on one throw, they would be digging their own graves. Therefore, it was best to be safe. So you're the only one going? Unrivaled God suddenly stood up and said in a low voice. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, smiled and nodded, telling everyone his attitude. Unrivaled God wanted to say something, but he sat down right away. Even Emperor Qin and the others were not strong enough. He was only a rank 2 martial emperor now. He would be a burden even if he went. On the other hand, Xiao Yang only had to think about his own survival no matter what he did. He did not care about anything else. Therefore, he still had a chance to survive if he encountered a strong enemy. If they went, they would be a burden instead. At this moment, Unrivaled God could almost understand Xiao Yang's thoughts. However, now that he thought about it, he could not help but feel a little sad. It was as if he had to bear all of this. The king and the others could not help but be moved. They believed that Xiao Yang had made a rash decision in the heat of the moment. But now, it seemed like he was courting death. What he needed to do was to stop the enemy's army by himself and buy time for the 4-realm alliance. But if he left, would he be able to return? This question appeared in everyone's mind. They all knew that this trip would not bode well for them. It went without saying how great the risk was. The rewards of such a risky approach were also very impressive. This was because once Xiao Yang succeeded, he would be able to hold back many people by himself. At that time, the pressure on them would become even smaller. Sect leader Xiao is truly bold. This one admires you. Luo Ji cupped his fists and said sincerely, Xiao Yang was able to make so many people follow and trust him. Now, it seemed that it was not without reason. Sometimes, when there was a need for someone to step forward, he would always be the first to do so. Therefore, with such boldness and style, how could people not admire him? Many of the things he had done were even more admirable. At first, there were still objections. However, at this moment, those who were against him kept quiet. If something happens to you, what will happen to the drifting cloud realm? The king asked with a frown after a long while. This was also a question that was completely out of personal friendship. There won't be any problems. I'm not stupid. I know very well what I should do, Xiao Yang said with a smile. Seeing this, the king did not intend to continue persuading him. Since Xiao Yang had already made up his mind, no matter how much he said, it would be difficult to make him give up. Moreover, he was very concerned about the safety of the drifting cloud realm. He probably made this choice because he had no other choice. Then how should we cooperate with you? The king asked in a low voice. If Xiao Yang were to take the risk alone, it would be too risky. If they could cooperate, the effect would naturally be much better. Everyone began to think about it. For such a plan, since it was possible to pin down the enemy's army, they had to cooperate well and increase the success rate of the plan, instead of a monotonous and boring invasion. Furthermore, with Xiao Yang's ability, it would be very risky for him to go alone. It was even possible that he would fall into the abyss. We need someone with a sharp tongue to go to the Inflame realm and tell their leader that the Wansho realm is withdrawing their army and heading towards our four-realm alliance. If they can send troops to fight, the Wansho realm will definitely be shocked. If we can make them send troops to the Wansho realm, our goal will be achieved, Xiaoyang said in a low voice. Hearing this, everyone nodded in succession. If the Inflame realm really counterattacked because of this, then the Wansho realm would definitely change their strategy. Once they changed, it would affect the whole situation. It was even possible that they would watch the fire burn across the river. But remember, don't let the Inflame realm's army enter our four realms. Otherwise, we might be inviting a wolf into our house, Xiaoyang said with a bitter smile. The propriety and control of the fire required an extremely high level of skill in order to achieve this. If there was a mistake in any part, what awaited them would not be cooperating to attack the Wansho realm, but a disaster. Everyone was well aware of which was more important. I'll go. King Zhao stood up and smiled. Everyone looked at King Zhao, and their expressions changed several times. Speaking of which, I don't have to make decisions, and I don't have fourth brother's ability, so I'm more like an idle person, King Zhao said with a smile. The expressions of King Da and the others also changed slightly. However, the nature of this matter was very important, and they had to think more about it. In fact, they could not allow any mistake in any part of the plan. In that case, we'll have to trouble King Zhao. Xiaoyang made the decision. Since King Zhao took the initiative to volunteer, and was indeed the most suitable person, there was naturally no problem in letting him do it. Then, when will fellow Xiao depart? Luo Ji asked. Xiaoyang thought for a moment and said, After I've arranged everything, I'll set off. After all, this matter cannot be delayed. Once the enemy's army is fully assembled, I'm afraid we won't be able to stop the momentum. Cut off the enemy's momentum before it is fully formed. Chapter 2394. The meeting lasted for an entire day and only ended in the evening. Some of the details that needed to be taken note of had also been completely finalized. When they parted, everyone could not help but feel a little sad, because the decision made this time more or less made people feel a little helpless. Xiaoyang said that he was going to invade, but it made people feel like he would never return. Standing on top of the high walls of God Capital, Unrivaled God looked down at the sea of clouds. His expression became much more solemn. Now, even he himself was not sure if he had made the right choice by forcefully dragging Xiaoyang into the alliance. If Xiaoyang was still in the 3,000 minor worlds, he would still be able to do whatever he wanted. Now, he would not have to shoulder so much. It seems like there's really nothing I can do to help you this time, Unrivaled God said, smiling bitterly and helplessly. Brothers were supposed to fight side by side. However, up until now, there was nothing he could do because of his lack of ability. Why bother? If you were in my position, you would do the same, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Unrivaled God was speechless. If he really had Xiaoyang's overpowering ability, he would do the same. However, he did not have the right to do so. The difference in ability prevented him from doing such things. Even if it was Xiaoyang, this trip would be like exploring a dragon's den. If he was not careful, he might not be able to return. Don't think too much. Everyone is just doing their best to protect. I'll leave the safety of this place to you guys, Xiaoyang said with a smile. With that, Xiaoyang leaped and disappeared into the vast sea of clouds. Unrivaled God's worries increased as he watched the figure disappear. Life was unpredictable. No one knew if they would meet again next time. The king walked over and patted his eldest son's shoulder, saying, I may not be very clear about the relationship between you two, but Xiaoyang's character is trustworthy. Unrivaled God only smiled slightly. The many emotions involved could not be explained in a few words. I didn't expect third uncle to volunteer this time, Shen Wushuang said with a smile. King Da nodded his head nonchalantly and said, In the past, third brother was good with words. Later on, he became less talkative in order to maintain his dignity after he rose to a high position. Unrivaled God was rather confused. What kind of explanation was that? Xiaoyang did not stop along the way and returned to the flowing cloud world at the fastest speed possible. Furthermore, he also gathered all the core members of the divine realm together and informed them of the strategy they had decided upon in the divine realm. Of course, most of it was about the magical effects of some of the formations he had left behind, or how to activate them. Once he left the flowing cloud realm, the defense of this place would completely rely on the people here. Although the realm of the gods would also send a large number of reinforcements, the number of martial emperors who would be able to come would probably not be many. After settling everything, Xiaoyang heaved a sigh of relief. "Am I still going with you this time?" Mu Yang asked with a smile. Now, when Mu Yang thought about how he and Xiaoyang had flattened the profound fighting world together, he felt his blood boil. Who would have thought that they would have the opportunity to fight side by side now? It was indeed very frustrating to fight in one's own world all the time. Moreover, there were restrictions. However, if they went to another world, they naturally did not have to worry about whether they would cause harm to their own world. All they had to do was unleash their own abilities. "I'll go alone," Xiaoyang said calmly. Chu Taiyin, Xiao Chongxing, and the others were stunned as well. If Xiaoyang were to go alone, he would be risking his life alone. There might not even be anyone who could help him. Although your abilities are not bad, and we have good teamwork after careful consideration, we definitely need someone to hold the fort here. Otherwise, who would be able to defend against an army? Moreover, you're the most proficient in controlling formations here, Xiaoyang said with a smile. With Mu Yang's abilities, if he were to hold the fort at Summit Victory Mountain, he would still be able to fight even if a rank 4 powerhouse came. Even if Summit Victory Mountain was lost, there were still some passes that they could hold on to. They could also rely on formations to stall for time. Although Ji Fei was not bad either, his strength realm was still a little lacking. "I understand. Be careful along the way." Mu Yang's heart was conflicted for a long time before he smiled bitterly. The current situation was still different from the time when they attacked the profound fighting world. Now, the flowing cloud world was in a precarious state. There might be an army coming at any time. Having someone to hold the fort was the safest thing to do. "Then we'll wait for your good news," Ji Fei said with a smile. When he said this, Ji Fei also felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. In the future, the safety of the flowing cloud world will depend on everyone. Xiaoyang cupped his hands and said. Mu Yang's face darkened as he said, "You say this as if we're not a part of the flowing cloud world." When these words came out, everyone's face immediately darkened. Of course, they did this so that Xiaoyang would not be under too much pressure. Since everyone was from the flowing cloud world, they should naturally fight to protect this place and not rely on the strength of one person. Looking at everyone's expressions, Xiaoyang also breathed a sigh of relief. Although he was still a little worried, he had no choice but to do this since they had already come to this point. If they really waited for the Wanshou world's army to gather and then come all the way, the flowing cloud world would definitely not be able to stop them. Even if they combined all the forces of the 4 worlds, it would probably be difficult to stop them. Defeat in one battle, defeat in one battle. Furthermore, taking the initiative to attack this time was a choice that they had no choice but to do. If there were other options, Xiaoyang would definitely not do this. This matter was like a huge stone pressing down on his heart, causing Xiaoyang to feel a little breathless. There were too many things that he had to bear and do. If any of them went wrong, the end result would be completely different. If you need reinforcements, just ask. Rather than letting us watch our own world being destroyed, we might as well fight to the death with them. Suddenly he laughed out loud. The current flowing cloud world was also a restriction to them. Because they wanted to protect it, they had no choice but to lay down their lives and shed their blood for it. Xiaoyang nodded his head solemnly, but he had to do what he said. If it really reached the point where they could not defend, he could only do as Mu Yang said and wait for an opportunity to take revenge. Chapter 2395. After arranging the internal matters, Xiaoyang heaved a sigh of relief and returned to his house to rest. Of course, he had to communicate with the world spirit about his departure. Moreover, after Xiaoyang left, in order to ensure the safety of this place, he had to rely on the spirit of the world to a large extent. They were connected in the first place, and in the blink of an eye, the world spirit appeared in front of Xiaoyang. I already know what you're thinking. Although it's very risky, it's a good idea, the world spirit said with a smile. Although there was no other way, they could still fight for a chance of survival. Risks and rewards were always proportionate. Xiaoyang laughed awkwardly. Previously, he didn't know how to say it, but now that the world spirit had sensed it clearly, he didn't need to waste his breath. During this period of time, I might need you to spend more effort to take care of the flowing cloud world. If there's an invasion, you have to send out the information as soon as possible, Xiaoyang said. The world spirit nodded and said, I think Zhou Xiao isn't bad. Zhou Xiao was Mu Yang's disciple. He was the new genius that shocked the flowing cloud world a while ago, breaking through 3 realms in one night. Xiaoyang laughed. He didn't think that the world spirit had purposely created this person. But then again, if it weren't for the world spirit's favor, how could he have improved so quickly? This child is young, and I'm afraid it'll be difficult to give him an important task. He's also smart. If he figures out something and can't control his mouth, it'll be troublesome, Xiaoyang said. Immediately, the world spirit's expression changed slightly. Zhou Xiao was indeed someone it valued, and it was prepared to nurture him well. Perhaps he could even take over Xiaoyang in the future. However, the decision on this matter also made the world spirit a little hesitant. Go find Muyang. He looks confused, but he knows how to act, Xiaoyang said softly. The world spirit nodded. That seemed to be the best choice. After Xiaoyang left, Muyang would definitely become the person with real power in the flowing cloud world. When the time came, some of the orders would be given by him, which would naturally be the most convenient. Moreover, if some information was transmitted too many times, who knew what would happen? I don't know if you'll survive this trip, but I can tell you a way to prepare for a rainy day, the world spirit suddenly said in a deep voice. These words made Xiaoyang slightly curious. Furthermore, as long as the world spirit spoke, what it said would be true. Therefore, he was looking forward to it. You have a stately painting in your hand. If you can refine Caesar's paradise into it, then you can establish a connection with the drifting cloud realm through that artifact. Once you enter, you can use the power of the world to quickly return to the drifting cloud realm, the world spirit said. Hearing this news, Xiaoyang couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. If he could pull his opponent into the Caesar grotto heaven, he might even be able to borrow the power of the world to fight his opponent. As such, there was no lack of a life-saving talisman. This involves the understanding of the power of space. I'm afraid it won't be easy to do. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. The world spirit nodded. That was indeed the case. Even if Caesar's paradise was put into the stately painting, it would require a great understanding of space to establish a connection with the drifting cloud realm. You've cultivated the art of great teleportation. As long as you put in some effort, you can still do it, the world spirit said in a deep voice. Xiaoyang smiled and nodded. Moreover, he had the experience of his previous life. It wouldn't be difficult for him to figure everything out. However, it would still take some time to do it. However, with such a suggestion, it would also save him a lot of trouble. After confirming this, Xiaoyang immediately got to work. Since he could put Mount Tianqin and the other artifacts into the stately painting, it wouldn't be a problem to refine Caesar's paradise. If it were in the past, it would indeed be difficult for Xiaoyang to do it. However, he was now a third-level martial emperor and could freely manipulate the world spirit. None of this would be a problem. In the following days, Xiaoyang focused all his attention on refining Caesar's paradise. At the same time, he still had another concern, which was whether he should bring Xiao Huo with him on this trip. Now that Xiaohu's ability was close to a 4th-level martial emperor, if he had its help, he would have another protective talisman on this trip. However, if he left it in the drifting cloud realm, he would have another protective talisman. Therefore, it became a difficult decision to make. No matter what choice he made, there would be pros and cons. It all depended on how he chose. At the moment, Xiaoyang was only thinking about this for a while. He hadn't made up his mind yet. After all, everything could only be decided after he had completely refined Caesar's paradise, divine capital. On the city wall, a man and a woman looked at the sea of clouds below, deep in thought. Unrivaled God had already told them everything he knew earlier. As for the choice, it was up to Princess Mingzhu. Although Princess Mingzhu did not break through within the agreed 1 month and spend a little more time, she finally did it. Is Xiaoyang really planning to do that? Princess Mingzhu asked somewhat uncertainly. Unrivaled God nodded and said, "If it weren't for some matters holding him up, I'm afraid he would have set off long ago." "He's a little anxious," Princess Mingzhu said calmly. Unrivaled God, on the other hand, smiled. How could he not be anxious under such circumstances? After all, this was a matter of life and death. Sometimes the slightest hesitation could bring about a catastrophe. As long as there was a glimmer of possibility, he would have to try. For the weaker party, sometimes fighting hard would have an unexpected effect. But this is indeed very interesting. What's the point of forming alliances? Just beat them up head-on, and that's enough, Princess Mingzhu said with a slight smile. Unrivaled God was stunned for a moment at first, but he immediately understood what Lin Huang meant. If you're not in the heavenly realm, I'm afraid many people feel uneasy. Especially some old fellows, they might be so angry that they'll stomp their feet, Unrivaled God teased. So far, only Unrivaled God knew that Princess Mingzhu had come out of closed-door cultivation this time. As long as you don't say anything, they'll think that I'm still in closed-door cultivation to break through. If something goes wrong, you'll definitely be the one who leaked the secret, Princess Mingzhu said, slightly unsheathing her sword. Chapter 2396. A tattered-looking flying ship was traveling in the vast starry sky. It was quiet and peaceful. On the bow of the ship, a young man was lying on the deck, looking at the dark sky. He squinted his eyes and looked like he was deep in thought. With the help of the world spirit, Xiaoyang was able to successfully store Caesar's grotto heaven into the stately painting within 10 days. He also created a simple spatial teleportation array. However, it was still not very stable. But this was not a problem. On the way to the realm of beasts, it was enough for him to perfect everything. As for the mountain and river map, because he had refined Caesar, it had become a spiritual-level instrument. But compared to a spiritual-level instrument, what the mountain and river map lacked was that it still hadn't developed its own consciousness. Regarding this, Xiaoyang only smiled. If it didn't, then it didn't. Many things could not be forced. Moreover, not all spiritual-grade magic tools could develop their own consciousness. On the other hand, instruments without consciousness were more resilient. Even though Xiaoyang's understanding of spatial arrays was not low, because he hadn't used it in a long time, he was still a bit unfamiliar with it. Therefore, when he tried to perfect it, he encountered a lot of difficulties. Luckily, some of the details, after much thinking, gradually became clear. This was a big project. Once it was perfected, then no matter where Xiaoyang was, he would have a life-saving talisman. It could be said that the talisman the world spirit gave him was very useful. Even if something happened in the flowing cloud world, Xiaoyang would be able to rush back in time. This also allowed Xiaoyang to go to the realm of beasts without worrying about the flowing cloud world's safety. To him, this naturally meant something different. Xiaoyang's mind was constantly analyzing the information from Bai Wuxi, Bai Xingyan, and the others. He slowly began to understand some of the customs of the realm of beasts. Of course, what he needed to study more was how to completely mess up the realm of beasts and make it so they didn't have time to deal with the flowing cloud world. There were many possibilities, but they were also very troublesome. With Xiaoyang's current ability, it was still slightly difficult for him to stir up a storm. Therefore, what Xiaoyang needed to do now was very helpless. At the same time, Xiaoyang also thought of many possibilities in his heart, but they were only temporary ideas and could not be implemented at all. After all, many things couldn't be settled with just a few words. No matter how many plans you have, if you encounter any unforeseen circumstances, your plans may be hindered. In fact, he might even have to pay an even greater price for it. It could be said that improvisation had always been the most crucial part. This was also the reason why Bai Wuxi, who was so good at scheming, had failed even though he had arranged everything flawlessly. It's just that he's a little lacking when it comes to improvising. Thinking about these things, Xiaoyang felt as if countless boulders were pressing down on his heart, making him feel unbearably pained. Moreover, as he thought and worried about more and more things, it was even more suffocating and unbearable. Sometimes things were just so strange. Even if you tried to hide, you couldn't avoid them. There were many problems that you had to deal with. There were many details that needed to be dealt with alone. It was like a mess, making one feel uncomfortable. If there was someone to discuss with, the pressure in Xiaoyang's heart would naturally be reduced by a lot. However, how could it be easy for Xiaoyang to find such a person? Moreover, there were many things that couldn't be explained clearly in a few words. Not long after, Xiaoyang saw a white rainbow flash in front of him and frowned slightly. He felt that he might be seeing things. After all, the three worlds were preparing for war now, so how could anyone go out so easily? However, in the next moment, Xiaoyang felt an extremely familiar aura approaching. He looked sideways and saw a woman in white floating down. "Why are you here?" Xiaoyang smiled bitterly and said, "The person who came was Princess Mingzhu, who had been in seclusion without any news for a long time." Xiaoyang felt that it was a little strange that she came after him this time. However, he had to admit that although she didn't complete the breakthrough in the agreed time, she was a blessed girl. However, the speed of her cultivation was truly like 1,000 miles a day, leaving others in the dust. "Why can't I come?" Princess Mingzhu smiled indifferently and said. Xiaoyang didn't know what to say to that. Now that Princess Mingzhu had broken through to the 4th level Martial Emperor, it was great news for the entire Four Realms Alliance. Moreover, they could also rely on this to do more things. Even forming an alliance with the Inflame Realm was something that could be achieved. Everything was ready, and the East Wind had arrived. How's the alliance with the Inflame world going? Xiaoyang smiled bitterly and said, the original plan had been changed again because of Princess Mingzhu's appearance. There were many strategies that were not set in stone. They would always make the most suitable decision under the most suitable situation. Then there would be more possibilities. Moreover, the stability would be very high. I think your suggestion is very good. As for the alliance with the Inflame world, it's just compromising. It's meaningless. On the contrary, we should join hands and kill them all. Only then can we eliminate these hidden dangers forever. Princess Mingzhu said with a smile. Sometimes, compromising wouldn't necessarily bring him much benefit. However, once one tried their best, there might be a different result. In this way, one might be able to get more benefits. When Xiaoyang heard these words, he could only smile bitterly. These words sounded impassioned, but they also appeared to be somewhat reckless. I don't believe that those old guys will let you go with me to the Myriad Beast realm to cause trouble. After all, it's easy to go, but it's not very likely to come back. Xiaoyang said helplessly. Although these words were pessimistic, it was suitable for their current situation. Those old guys don't know. So what if they know? With their ability, can they stop me? Princess Mingzhu raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, who in the God realm could stop her from doing anything she wanted? Chapter 2397. Hearing such words, Xiaoyang couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. This high and mighty Princess Mingzhu was really willful. It was as if nothing mattered to her. She could do whatever she wanted. Such an unscrupulous way of doing things was indeed somewhat incomprehensible to others. However, Princess Mingzhu did indeed have such a privilege. Regardless of her status, she was the strongest existence in the divine realm on the surface. In this way, who would be able to restrain her? You're really going to go with me to wreak havoc in the realm of beasts? Xiaoyang smiled. Princess Mingzhu nodded and said, "What else can I do? We've worked together for so long. You didn't inform me about such a satisfying thing. That's not very kind of you, right?" Between her words, there was a hint of blame. From Princess Mingzhu's point of view, Xiaoyang's suggestion and method were the most effective. To the Four Realms Alliance, they needed such an invasion to disrupt the enemy's deployment. Selfishly speaking, in such a high-intensity battle, they could quickly increase their strength. Their current strength was indeed a little weak. If they could quickly increase their strength, then the situation they faced would be greatly different. At least, with an expert who could hold the fort, the surrounding forces wouldn't start to covet and scrupulously. At that time, you hadn't come out of seclusion and the situation wasn't clear. I had to come up with a feasible plan. Otherwise, if we were always on guard, it would be no different from waiting for death. Now that we've tried it, we might be able to get more time to breathe. Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. Now, Xiaoyang was also very helpless. Since they had already come to this step, they could only take one step at a time. As for how far they could go, it would depend on their own luck. What they needed to do was to create new variables before the new variables arrived. Only in this way could they have a greater possibility of helping their own world. Speaking of which, I broke my promise. This is good. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to think of such a good idea. Perhaps we're still having a headache on how to defend. Princess Mingzhu smiled. Although the war between them and the White Bear tribe was very beautiful, and they even won a complete victory that was only for one tribe. At that time, once the many tribes of the myriad beast realm joined forces to invade, with their current strength, they would not be able to defend. Perhaps it would fall into the enemy's hands in the shortest time possible. The weaker one was, the more they had to take the initiative to attack in order to protect themselves. It could be said that it was fortunate that the myriad beast world was in an extremely stalemate with the Een Flame world. Otherwise, once their opponents went all out against them, then the consequences would truly be unimaginable. These were all problems that needed to be considered, and there couldn't be any mistakes. On the other hand, Princess Mingzhu's warlike style made Xiaoyang blush with shame. However, this was the only way out for them. Riches and honor came with risk. Since you've already decided, I won't say anything else. But I can tell you that this trip is very dangerous. Perhaps both of us will die in the myriad beast realm, Xiaoyang said in a low voice. Although this was the worst-case scenario, it was also very likely to happen. To the two of them, the myriad beast realm was like a dragon's pool and a tiger's den. If they were careless and fell, then they would be consigned to eternal damnation. I know, Princess Mingzhu replied indifferently. In her opinion, this matter was nothing more than that. Since it was a risky attempt, then they would have to bear the risks. If they could bear it, then they would be successful and famous. Even if they died, it was their own choice, and they couldn't blame others. In this regard, Princess Mingzhu was also very indifferent. She even felt that she had to be responsible for the decision she made. Xiaoyang laughed involuntarily. Facing Princess Mingzhu's attitude, he didn't know what to say. However, with such a person accompanying them, then he could be more at ease. At least they could take care of each other, and they wouldn't be without a helper. Moreover, Princess Mingzhu's fourth-level Martial Emperor realm was also a great help, although the invasion of the two of them seemed very weak. However, as long as they turned into a sharp knife and kept stabbing, it would be enough to cause a lot of trouble to their opponents. Then, let's discuss the next thing in detail, Xiaoyang said. Since Princess Mingzhu had joined them, Xiaoyang's plan naturally had to be changed. Moreover, there were also many details that needed to be changed. Tell me, Princess Mingzhu said. Since the war with the White Bear tribe started, Xiaoyang had been commanding this war. Considering the losses suffered by the Four Realms Alliance, his command was undoubtedly brilliant. Therefore, with him making the plan, many things would become much simpler. In Fairy's capital, the higher-ups were in chaos again. This was because on this day, when Jiang Zhangqing passed by Princess Mingzhu's seclusion place, he found that the door was already open, but Princess Mingzhu was nowhere to be found. Previously, Jiang Zhangqing didn't dare to believe it, so he repeatedly confirmed it several times. When he found out that it was the truth, he was instantly incomparably shocked. Instantly, the old man felt the world spinning. This was like a huge blow that directly landed on his head. Princess Mingzhu's disappearance was a huge blow to the entire God's realm. Therefore, the first thing Jiang Zhangqing did was to gather everyone and discuss strategies. He hoped to find some clues from their discussion. Emperor Qin made a prompt decision and directly sealed the door that had already been opened. After all, not many people knew about this matter, so it couldn't be allowed to continue spreading. If the news that Princess Mingzhu was no longer in the God's realm spread out, perhaps the Four-Realm Alliance would be shocked and terrified. Now, because Xiaoyang invaded the Wanshou realm and wasn't in the Drifting Cloud realm, Princess Mingzhu was their strongest battle force. Once she was no longer in the God's realm, it would cause panic. At that time, the morale of the Four-Realm Alliance's army would most likely be shaken. At that time, the consequences would definitely be immeasurable. Therefore, this kind of news must be completely suppressed and must not be spread at all. Otherwise, the consequences would be unpredictable. At this juncture, a lot of people felt a headache coming on. This really caught them unprepared. All of this was completely out of his expectations. Chapter 2398. In the Great Hall, everyone's expression became extremely solemn and serious. To them, Princess Mingzhu's sudden disappearance had given them immense pressure. If they could not find her in time, the safety of the God realm would be in danger. It was even possible that there would be even more chaos because of this. Moreover, the invasion of the Beast realm could come at any time. Since Princess Mingzhu was not around, who could lead everyone to fight back? Although Emperor Qin was also good at battle formations, there was still a gap between his ability and Princess Mingzhu's. The gap was not just a little bit. Moreover, it gave many soldiers confidence. What the hell is going on? The king took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart as he asked. Now, everyone was calculating in their hearts. If Princess Mingzhu did not return after a long time, what would they do if they encountered an invasion from other worlds? Some people had even begun to think about how to protect themselves in the future. Without an absolute combat power to hold the fort, everyone felt that the World Alliance was in a precarious situation. Everyone present did not speak because the continuous changes in the plan almost made them unable to react. Moreover, the most important thing had been lost. Even if they came up with more strategies, they might not be able to last long enough and would be meaningless. Emperor Qin held his head. At the same time, he began to think quickly in his heart about what he could do to turn the situation around. As for Princess Mingzhu's whereabouts, he did not have the time to care about it now. After all, without Princess Mingzhu, they would definitely need someone to shoulder the burden. Otherwise, it would be a little ridiculous to pin all their hopes on her. The vast God realm could be said to be full of heroes, but in the end, they would need a woman to save them. That would be a little ridiculous. On the contrary, many people treated her as their last life-saving straw instead of letting themselves be the straw. This was even more ridiculous. Suddenly, Emperor Qin saw Shen Wushuang's incomparably calm expression. Suddenly, he thought of something and laughed out loud. Everyone was puzzled when they saw Emperor Qin's laughter. How could he laugh at such a critical moment? Or was it because he had suffered such a huge blow that he had lost his mind? Fourth brother, what did you think of? The king asked. Qin Wang glanced at Shen Wushuang again and said, If I'm not mistaken, I'm afraid the girl has already gone to the Wanshou realm to fight alongside Xiaoyang, As soon as these words were spoken, everyone present was shocked. In that case, this explanation was the most reasonable. Princess Mingzhu naturally wouldn't run away because of fear. Thus, this explanation was extremely reliable. Mingzhu doesn't know about this strategy. The king frowned. When this strategy appeared, Princess Mingzhu was still in seclusion, and no one had notified her during this period of time. Therefore, such a possibility was almost impossible. Then you'll have to ask Wushuang. After all, he has always been close to Mingzhu. Their relationship is not shallow, Qin Wang said with a smile. Unrivaled God's brows furrowed tightly when he was stared at like that. He glared back, unwilling to admit defeat. Fourth uncle, please don't make things up. Unrivaled God forced a smile. However, everyone's eyes were on Unrivaled God. The questioning intent in their eyes was obvious. As a result, Unrivaled God felt an immense headache coming on. It seemed like it would be impossible to fool them over this matter. If he admitted to this matter, the consequences he would have to bear would be extremely terrifying, especially the way the king looked at him. It was as if countless sharp blades were cutting him. Unrivaled God was helpless. He was filled with hatred now. Fourth uncle, you're smart, but it's enough that you know. Why do you have to expose me? In the vast starry sky, the battered flying ship was still traveling. Although it was not very fast, it still traveled tens of thousands of miles in a day. With Princess Mingzhu's participation, Xiaoyang already had a new plan in this war. Some new details were also gradually being put into place. At the moment, Xiaoyang was drawing a map of the Wanshou realm by hand. This was a general concept drawn according to the information he had obtained. Although it was not very accurate, it was still a rough idea. Many things were marked on this map. However, it was not an easy task to complete this map. Moreover, organizations of all sizes were tangled and complicated. On the other hand, Xiaoyang had already informed Blind Left and Blind Right about his trip to the Wanshou realm. When the two of them received the news, they could only look at each other in dismay. They wanted to stay away from Xiaoyang to save their own lives. However, he had taken the initiative to come this time, which made them feel a little uncomfortable. That brat really doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. How dare he come to the Wanshou realm in person to cause trouble? Blind Right sat limply on the ground and smiled bitterly. Back when they were causing trouble in the Sword Heart realm, they were extremely cunning. However, in the end, they were still caught by Xiaoyang. It was also for this reason that they were willing to provide information to Xiaoyang. This might be good news for us two brothers. Blind Left's expression suddenly changed as he sneered. Blind Right did not quite understand, his face full of confusion. Since Xiaoyang was able to severely damage the vitality of the White Bear tribe, it is enough to show how terrifying his strength is. Blind's paused when he said this. This was because some words would be very dangerous if the walls had ears. After making sure that there were no spies around, Blind Left continued. If Xiaoyang can really turn the Wanshou realm upside down, then we can use the convenience of surrendering to rise to the top. As soon as he said this, Blind Right's eyes shone with a sharp light. In that case, it was indeed a very good choice. As long as their tribe could become stronger, it would be enough. As for the survival of other tribes, what did it have to do with them? Therefore, there were still profits to be made from these things. On the other hand, if Xiaoyang dies in the Wanshou realm, he can only blame himself. In that case, by then, no one will be able to control us. No matter what, there's no harm in advancing or retreating. What we need to pay attention to is not to be discovered by others that we are on Xiaoyang's side. Blind Left sneered. Blind You also nodded repeatedly. From the looks of it, this was indeed a very good choice. Chapter 2399. After telling Left Blind and Right Blind what they needed to do, Xiaoyang roughly completed the map in his hand. The markings on the map were indeed very simple, because there were only a few important and powerful tribes that were pointed out on the map. At that moment, Princess Mingzhu sat down. Since the matter was done, what they needed to do next was to come up with a general strategy. As for the specific situation, there would naturally be changes later on. A wise route would, of course, require a long period of polishing before it could be perfect. If one did everything according to one's whims without any preparation, it would be equivalent to seeking one's own death. No matter who it was, they would not be willing to see such a situation. Moreover, they did not have any reinforcements for the invasion this time, so they had to be even more cautious. The 10 points that I marked out are where the 10 strongest tribes of the Wanshou realm are stationed, Xiaoyang said softly. Princess Mingzhu nodded slightly. Looking at the 10 points, she was already clear in her heart. As long as they killed their way through and defeated all the 10 tribes, it would be enough for the Wanshou realm to retreat. One should know that the 10 tribes were the entire strength of the Wanshou realm. As for the other tribes, their strength was uneven and would not be a threat to them. However, it was not an easy task to take down the 10 great tribes. Seeing Princess Mingzhu's expression, Xiaoyang knew that she had understood the crux of the matter. It was indeed very easy to work with a smart person. There was no need to explain every point clearly. He only needed to give a rough idea. However, if we want to take action against the 10 tribes, we have to choose carefully and there can't be any mistakes. What I want is to fight them one by one and make them feel insecure. If we can increase our strength in this process, we might really be able to defeat them, Xiaoyang said, and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. It could be said that the invasion this time was more like an experience for them. If they could achieve the expected goal, they could really turn the tide. However, the possibility of that happening wasn't very high, and this made people feel a little helpless. The affairs of the world were unpredictable. No one could predict when they would break through. However, one thing was certain, and that was that once an opportunity appeared, they would definitely do their best to seize it. The White Bear tribe that we fought before is ranked 9th among the 10 great tribes, Xiaoyang said. Princess Mingzhu laughed when she heard that. From the looks of it, the 10 great tribes of the myriad beast realm might not be as terrifying as they had imagined. Our chances of winning are very high. Princess Mingzhu smiled. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, the strength gap between the top 10 tribes is not small. Although there are differences between each tribe, the gap between the 10th and the 1st is still very wide. The 10 great tribes of 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 the 10,000 beasts realm. At this moment, Princess Mingzhu's expression changed. If that was the case, then they really needed to think about it at length. How much do you know about the strength of each tribe? Princess Mingzhu asked. If they could figure out their opponent's strength and come up with a battle plan, it would be much simpler. Then Xiaoyang pointed at the outermost point and said, this tribe is ranked 10th, and they don't have many powerhouses. One of them is at the 5th rank, and the other is at the 4th rank. As for the cultivators below them, I don't think we need to worry too much. We can deal with them. Princess Mingzhu nodded silently. She was also at the 4th rank of the martial emperor realm and was considered invincible among those in the same realm. She had nothing to be afraid of for those cultivators whose realms were lower than hers. In fact, a single slash from her sword was enough to kill many people. Then let's start with this tribe, Princess Mingzhu said coldly. Naturally, they had to pinch the soft persimmon. Moreover, it was their first battle, so they had to deal a heavy blow to their opponent. Therefore, in this way, it would be able to be of great use. Xiaoyang nodded and said, moreover, we need to end the battle quickly. If we want to kill a tribe to the last one, it'll be difficult with our abilities. Therefore, as long as we kill the two strongest ones, we'll retreat immediately. If a tribe really gathered together, when many martial emperors joined forces, the power that could be unleashed was not to be underestimated. Princess Mingzhu nodded. They were going for a surprise attack. If the battle dragged on, there would be endless trouble. As for the White Bear tribe, since they're invading us, we have to prepare some gifts for them. Xiaoyang said as the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. At the same time, he came up with a small plan in his heart. Once it was implemented, there might be unexpected results. Princess Mingzhu only smiled. She was also curious about the plan behind this. In the sword scar abyss, a young man in ragged clothes was moving forward. However, it was extremely difficult for him to move forward. It looked like he was dragging his own legs as he moved forward. Bai Jian had entered this place, and he could not remember how much time had passed. However, during these days he had suffered a lot of torture. The invasion of the cold wind, the cutting of the sword qi, and even the torture of his mind. Under all these kinds of pain, he had persevered and even continued to move forward. It was not easy at all. In the beginning, Bai Jian would still use his own power to resist. However, as time passed, the power in his body was almost exhausted. Therefore, he simply stopped resisting. He allowed these strange powers to torture him. All he needed to do was to keep moving forward. He wanted to walk through the entire sword scar abyss and see if there were any miraculous uses in the legends. As for whether he could obtain anything, he did not have any extravagant hopes. Presumably, the ancestor who created the sword scar abyss was at most a second-level martial emperor. In the Battle of the Western Plains, he, Bai Jian, also had the chance to reach the same level. However, there were some accidents that caused him to lose his drive. Right now, he was neither human nor ghost as he walked in the sword scar abyss. As for his tattered clothes, Bai Jian didn't care at all. This was because his mind had become somewhat absent-minded under the torture of this strange place. The current Bai Jian did not look much different from a walking corpse. He relied on his willpower to move forward. Chapter 2400. Li Fengmu stood above the sword scar abyss and stared down. There was a hint of sadness in his eyes. It had been a long time since Bai Jian entered the sword scar abyss, but he had yet to come out. This made the Sword Heart Realm's patriarch extremely worried. If it was before, Li Fengmu would not have been so worried. This was because he believed that with Bai Jian's temperament, he would be able to come out very soon. When he returned, he would definitely look like a king. When that time came, he would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. He would still be the genius disciple who was in high spirits and respected by thousands. However, as time passed, it even exceeded the limit he had expected. This made him feel a little uneasy. There were indeed many hidden opportunities in the sword scar abyss. As long as he could seize them, he would naturally pave a magnificent path for the future. However, the more time passed, the worse it would be. However, the longer he stayed in the sword scar abyss, the greater the impact on his state of mind. When that time came, there would probably be more hidden dangers. It was even possible that he would not be able to come out again. Therefore, under all these conditions, a sad inference was formed. In the past, all the Sword Heart Realm cultivators who entered the Sword Scar Abyss would definitely come out in less than half a year. If they did not come out, then no one would come out again. Could it be that a generation of Sky Prides was going to die in the Sword Scar Abyss? Thinking of this, Li Fengmu felt rather upset. After all, it was still very difficult to say what would happen. Fortune and misfortune came hand in hand. If he could not survive the misfortune, then he would naturally lose the good fortune that came later. After a while, a young man walked over and said softly, "Patriarch, Xin Wushuang sent news that Princess Mingzhu has gone to the 10,000 Beast Realm with Xiaoyang." Hearing this, Li Fengmu was stunned for a moment. His eyes were filled with doubt and worry. After all, if Princess Mingzhu was not in charge of the Four Realm Alliance, it would be an extremely terrifying thing. In fact, it might even cause more disasters. However, his furrowed brows suddenly relaxed. Li Fengmu smiled and said, "This is a good thing." Naturally, Li Fengmu knew what it meant for Princess Mingzhu to come out of closed-door cultivation. Moreover, the situation here had always been treacherous. If Xiao Yang were to go alone, how big of a wave would he be able to cause? Therefore, it was hard to say if they would still be able to move the myriad beast realm. However, with the addition of Princess Mingzhu, his plan would naturally be much smoother. At that time, the harvest would naturally be self-evident. With all these calculations, even if the danger level of the Four Realms Alliance was pushed to the highest, so what? Once they succeeded, the profits they would receive would not be underestimated. It's also because I am unable to display my peak strength after leaving the Sword Heart world. Otherwise, I would have followed them as well, Li Fengmu said in a self-deprecating manner. In the end, those hot-blooded matters should be left to the youngsters. As for Li Fengmu, he was already old. It was impossible for him to act as he pleased. Even at such a juncture, his every move had to be carefully considered. After all, he could not act on his own will alone. What he was shouldering was the life and death of an entire world. If he took a wrong step, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. If they were in the 3,000 small realms, the Sword Heart world itself had the power to protect itself. Therefore, he did not need to worry about these things. However, at this point, he was the only one who could shoulder the burden. How could he act as he pleased? Therefore, with so many things happening, he could be said to be restricted in every way he could. Then, are you going to be a burden to them? Li Fengmu directly interrupted the young man and scolded him. The young man lowered his head. In the end, he could only sigh helplessly. Speaking of which, as a martial emperor, he was just a drop in the ocean in the myriad beast realm. He was nothing and was not enough. Li Chunyi also understood this. Therefore, he did not say anything more. Instead, he smiled and swept away the haze in his heart. Since these things could not be forced, all he had to do was to do his part. You and I must not spread this news. Just keep it to yourself, Li Fengmu said. Li Fengmu knew very well that this news came from unrivaled God and not a king. It was clear that the God realm did not want this news to spread. As for why unrivaled God had said this, his purpose was naturally clear. He wanted to inform his allies about the situation so that he could have a plan, so that when the time came, he would not pin his hopes on a fantasy. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu traveled through the endless galaxy. They did not encounter any cultivators along the way. It must be because the war between the myriad beast realm and the Inflame realm was too intense. Therefore, there were naturally fewer people training outside. However, the two of them did not have the slightest bit of leisure. This was because they were either cultivating along the way or plotting to invade the myriad beast realm. They had even perfected some of the details very well. Moreover, they came up with a small plan in their hearts. If they succeeded, it would be enough to cause turmoil in the entire myriad beast realm. At that time, once the Wanshou realm was in turmoil, their invasion plan would naturally be delayed. The purpose of their attack was to prevent the myriad beast realm from invading the Four Realm Alliance. That was all, as long as they could achieve their goal. So what if they had to resort to some tricks? However, no matter how good their plan was, they realized that there were still some discrepancies in many aspects. Therefore, how to solve these problems naturally became a point of doubt in their hearts. Even though there would always be a way out when the time came, if there was no way out when the time came, then they would really be in a desperate situation. Moreover, they were going in alone. There was no telling when they would encounter unimaginable consequences. Therefore, it was better to leave a way out to ensure their own safety. That would not be bad. Princess Mingzhu was a little displeased with the issue of leaving a way out. This was because, in her opinion, since they had made such a decision, they must bravely advance and charge in like a hot knife through butter. This kind of momentum was constantly growing from the slaughter. It struck fear into the myriad beast realm, so they did not dare to have any devious thoughts at all. They killed until they were terrified, so naturally they would not dare to cause trouble again. "We're here." After a long time, they gradually saw the outline of the myriad beast realm and arrived at this new battlefield. Chapter 2401. Princess Mingzhu also stood up and looked over. She saw the silhouette at a glance. The silhouette of the Wanshou realm was also very shocking because it looked like an incomparably huge beast. The undulating mountain range was like a skeleton, which was very shocking. The continent also looked very strange. For a moment, it was difficult to identify what kind of beast it was. Using a beast's corpse to form a world, it could be said that it was a big deal. Hence, it was hard to imagine what kind of powerful beast could become a world after its death. The world was so big and so many. The mysteries in it were even more indescribable and unclear. Xiaoyang was also extremely shocked when he saw this. This kind of extravagance really made him gasp in admiration. Legend had it that the Wanshou realm was formed from a beast's corpse. All along, he had thought that it was just a rumor and was somewhat unrealistic. However, now that he saw it with his own eyes, he could not help but feel a little shocked and a little different. Perhaps the legend started from the appearance of the Wanshou realm. It could even be said that it was not a rumor but a fact, because there were many coincidences in it. Once they were refined into a line, it was enough to make people ponder. However, Xiaoyang did not think too much about the origin of the Wanshou realm. Moreover, the purpose of their trip this time was not to study the origin of the world, but to protect themselves. I didn't expect the land of the Wanshou realm to be so much more fertile than our Four Realms Alliance, Princess Mingzhu said softly. The power of the Middle Realm was not as simple as it seemed. Now that they had seen it with their own eyes, they knew how powerful it was. "Let's go in stealthily. Don't alarm the guards," Xiaoyang said softly. While speaking, Xiaoyang took out the black robe that belonged to Bai Wuxi. The robe could isolate one's aura so that the opponent would not be able to detect one's presence. It could be said that it was the most suitable for stealth. Their first attack needed to cause a big commotion. If they were discovered as soon as they went in, it might be difficult. Princess Mingzhu nodded slightly. Soon after, she took out a piece of jade and wore it on her waist. Immediately, her aura was isolated. As the darling of the realm of the gods, Princess Mingzhu possessed countless good things. Her family's wealth was comparable to the previous flowing cloud realm, and that was only his personal property. Then, Xiaoyang casually stored the flying ship into the stately painting. When Princess Mingzhu saw this scene, she couldn't help but feel astonished. This sort of method was truly exquisite. Although she was curious, she did not pursue the matter. After all, there were many things that could not be said easily. After entering the myriad beast realm, they also felt an extremely uncomfortable aura. It was as if the air here was filled with the smell of blood. It seemed that the internal war in this world had never stopped. Speaking of which, this was indeed the case. Moreover, peace only belonged to the big clans. For example, the 10 great tribes of the myriad beast realm had always lived in harmony with each other, and there were even many collaborations between them. The invasion of the Inflame realm was led by the 10 great tribes. Of course, after they won, the rewards they received would always be the largest. Under the 10 great tribes, there were the 100 great tribes. These 100 great tribes could be said to be the backbone of the myriad beast realm. In front of the 10 great tribes, although they were nothing, once they united, they were an existence that could not be underestimated. However, the unity between the 100 great tribes was very dull. There were even many conflicts between them. As such, these tribes began to rely on the 10 great tribes to increase their own safety. For example, the Grey Wolf tribe that followed the White Bear tribe to invade. They were originally one of the 100 great tribes. However, because their abilities were weak, they had to rely on the White Bear tribe to survive. Then, under the 100 great tribes, those small forces were not much of a threat. Moreover, the resources in the myriad beast realm were only so much. If they wanted to obtain more, they could only expand their own land and forces. As a result, the war between the tribes could not be stopped. Regarding the war between these small tribes, whether it was the 10 great tribes or the 100 great tribes, they would not interfere. On the contrary, they felt that this kind of killing was a very good thing, because only the truly strong could kill their way out and become a useful talent in the myriad beast realm. As for those who lost their lives in the war, they were just trash. Even if they were alive, it was just a waste of resources. And from ancient times until now, there were many geniuses who killed their way out. They fought back in desperate situations and even brought their own tribes directly into the 100 great tribes. Even thousands of years ago, when an unknown small tribe was being invaded, an unparalleled genius appeared in the midst of despair. He led his tribe into endless wars and destroyed all the forces that had designs on their tribe. They climbed all the way up, and 100 years ago, they were promoted to the ranks of the top 10 tribes. It could be said that because of this special case, the war between the small tribes became even more intense. Perhaps under the baptism of blood, a peerless genius would appear in their own tribe, allowing their tribe to rise. In the future, they would not have to worry about being invaded by others on a whim. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu found a more secluded and uninhabited place to settle down. Princess Mingzhu's face was full of displeasure towards the atmosphere of this place. She was even very disgusted. Although Xiao Yang had previously told her about some strange places in the myriad beast realm, she did not expect the bestial nature to be so terrifying. It was really unpleasant. Bestial nature has always been like this. Survival of the fittest. If you were weak, then you would definitely be beaten or even swallowed up by others. That was a normal thing. Only when one was strong and unparalleled in the world could they be respected. Otherwise, everything would just be empty talk. Xiao Yang looked very calm, but his eyes also revealed a sense of disgust. Although there were many powerful cultivators in the myriad beast realm, they still maintained their bestial nature, constantly fighting among themselves, and did not know the rules. So what if they cultivated a human form? It was just a superficial appearance. Of course, this was also one of the reasons why the myriad beast realm was so tyrannical. Who did not want to live and be respected by others? The only way out was to become stronger, and the shortcut was to fight to the death. Chapter 2402. The Wanshou realm was very cold, and due to their bestial nature, the living beings here would always think about their own affairs. There were even many strange stories in the Wanshou realm. For example, 10,000 years ago, there was an almighty who, in order to cultivate his own technique, used the entire clan, regardless of whether they were old or young, women or children, to cultivate his own technique. His methods were cruel, and his sins were too numerous to be recorded. However, when the Almighty succeeded, no one hated him. Instead, he was worshipped and revered by countless beasts. There were even more stubborn beasts who saw him as a god and made it their life's cultivation goal. The Wanshou realm was like that, and the difference between bestial nature and human nature was so great. Different civilizations naturally created different situations. In a big environment, no matter who it was easy to change colors. After Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu settled down deep in the mountains, they did not move forward at all. This was because they needed to wait here for the two of them to arrive and wait for a more reliable report to be sent over. Since they had already planned everything here, it was necessary for them to bide their time and bide their time. Not long after, it started to drizzle. The smell of blood in the air also became a little heavier, making people feel very depressed. Princess Mingzhu really could not take it, so she used some methods to expel the smell, which made her feel better. Xiao Yang could only laugh helplessly. The Wanshou realm that he had heard a little about was still very different from what he knew. Even though he was already mentally prepared, when he really faced it, his heart was still a little touched, and he could not completely remain indifferent. Although they did not know how long they would have to wait, they were not in a hurry. After all, they had already waited for such a long time. So what was this little bit of time? Moreover, there were still some things that were not clear. Outside this mountain, there were two men dressed in black walking side by side. The person standing on the right looked extremely worried, as if he had encountered a huge problem that could not be solved at this time. So his mood naturally became a little bad. As for the man on the left, even though he looked calm and composed, his hands were still trembling slightly. It was obvious that he was having a hard time controlling his emotions and heart. Left blind that Xiao Yang is really bold. He actually dared to come. The man on the right smiled bitterly. Previously, blind right had thought that Xiao Yang was just bluffing and wanted them to spread the news so that the myriad beast realm would be wary and make preparations. However, he didn't expect that he would really come. Moreover, what he needed to do was even more shocking. Such a method could be said to be extremely daring. Blind Zwe smiled bitterly and helplessly when he heard this. He said, "Don't think too much about it. Since he has come to seek death, we shall fulfill his wish." The two of them had long known about Xiao Yang's movements. From the beginning, they had been constantly analyzing the gains and losses of this matter. As long as they were involved in this matter and were not discovered by others, they would always be safe. There was no need to worry about this at all. No matter which side won, they would reap the benefits. All of this depended on how one looked at it. Of course, after a serious discussion, they came to a more appropriate opinion. That was, Xiao Yang would definitely die. At that time, without the restriction of the contract, they would be free. If Xiao Yang died, there would naturally be no Almighty guarding the drifting cloud world. Perhaps there would be no threat to them. They could already go and take a share of the pie. However, I don't think that Brat is an idiot. Blind Right muttered in a somewhat depressed manner. This was also something that they had never thought through. Since Xiao Yang could use tricks to force them out of the sword scar abyss, and even kill Bai Wuxi in the confrontation, it could be seen how scheming he was. However, what he did now was a little rash. It was completely different from his previous steadiness. Maybe they know that the myriad beast realm is going to invade, so they are anxious and desperate. Blind Right said in a deep voice. This was also a helpless situation. He had no choice but to do so. Maybe it's because he has something to rely on that can support his daring. Blind Right frowned and said, as for what kind of possibility it was, they did not know and could not think clearly, because they knew too little information. It was naturally difficult to analyze these things clearly. However, Blind Right was thinking more about how to protect himself. If the news of him and Blind Right secretly meeting Xiao Yang was leaked, not only would they not be able to protect their lives, their entire tribe would be wiped out because of this. No one in the tribe would be able to survive. The myriad beast realm had always been so cruel. Their killing intent was even heavier. This damned rain really doesn't come at the right time. It's so annoying. Blind Right muttered gloomily. Blind Right just smiled and walked forward while observing the surrounding situation. Because they were afraid of being exposed, they did not dare to fly. They could only walk on the ground to avoid being conspicuous. Coming to meet Xiao Yang was already a very risky thing for them to do. In another world, it was also drizzling. A man in a black robe was sitting in a tea house, listening to a storyteller. Many people were sitting by the window watching the rain. There were even some children running and cheering outside. That was because to them, the arrival of this drizzle was like a miracle. The last time it rained was 100 years ago. The in-flame world was like this. Because everyone cultivated fire, the temperature here was also extremely high. As a result, even if there were some dark clouds, they would quickly disperse under such an atmosphere. The man sitting by the window tapped his finger on the table gently and fell into deep thought again. However, he did not miss the story that the storyteller was talking about. After a long time, the man slowly got up, put down a spirit stone, and left silently. His figure gradually moved further and further away in this drizzle, gradually disappearing. When King Zhao came to the in-flame world, he did not immediately look for those big forces. Instead, he mingled in various important towns to gather information. In the end, he came to the conclusion that it was easy to lead a wolf into the house. Therefore, it was difficult for him to carry out the previous plan. At the same time, he was unwilling to leave the Inflame world and leave his allies alone. Chapter 2403. In the cave, Princess Mingzhu stood at the entrance and looked at the continuous drizzle outside. She seemed very peaceful as she listened to the sound of the rain. They also set up some restrictions in the cave. Now that the faint smell of blood was gone, their complexions looked a little better. Xiao Yang took out a rattan chair and lay down on it with a relaxed look on his face. Not long after, 2 people walked in. When they saw the pure white robes, their minds couldn't help but tremble. Blind Left and Blind Right could not forget that Princess Mingzhu had used very fierce methods to kill a cultivator of the same level as her. Her methods were so powerful that they were afraid. Moreover, they had also paid a price in the harassment later. Of course, they were most afraid of Xiao Yang. Although Xiao Yang did not make a move last time, his scheming methods were top-notch. If the 2 of them worked together, they would definitely be able to dominate the world. Blind Left finally understood why Xiao Yang dared to come to the beast realm to cause trouble. It was because they had already made a plan and were fully prepared. Blind Right looked at the black robe, and his hands could not help but tremble slightly, because, in his opinion, that was where the nightmare was. He looked at the 2 of them again. They seemed to have a special method to hide their auras, and he could not sense their strength at all. This made Blind Right feel a little flustered in his heart. Originally, they wanted to find out how strong the 2 of them were, but now it seemed that it was a fantasy and was useless. They did not expect the 2 of them to be so careful about their self-protection. Some of the plans that they had made previously seemed a little powerless now. In the end, they might even be in vain. Blind Right was helpless about this, but it also confirmed that the opponent was terrifying. So how could he not panic? However, Blind Left was as calm as ever because he had already made various plans. No matter what kind of situation happened, he could handle it with ease. It could be said that even if Xiao Yang suddenly went berserk and wanted to take their lives, Blind Right would not be surprised. After all, the human heart was unpredictable. Who knew what Xiao Yang was thinking? Once they lost their value, it would be difficult to get a good result. Therefore, to a large extent, Blind was gambling. If he gambled correctly, he might soar into the sky. If he was wrong, he would probably lose his life here. However, there was nothing he could do. After all, his life was in Xiao Yang's hands. No matter how much he thought about it, it was meaningless. Sometimes it was better to wait and see. Sometimes one could find some opportunities. If he were to take the initiative to stir up trouble, he would only end up losing his life even faster. Furthermore, Princess Mingzhu had been standing at the entrance of the cave the entire time. She did not seem to be moving at all, but if they were to make any strange movements, she would probably directly attack with her sword. After analyzing the situation, Blind so completely suppressed the restlessness in his heart. After all, who would dare to rashly enter this dragon's lair and tiger's den if they weren't outstanding? However, Blindswell was still a little unhappy. He also felt very uncomfortable being under someone else's control. So what if he had so much resentment in his heart? If he wanted to live, he would inevitably have to grovel. Sometimes, once he took a wrong step, he might end up with a wrong step after that. If he walked on the wrong path, he would only make it worse. I didn't expect the 2 of you to be so diligent in your cultivation that you've broken through to rank 4, Xiao Yang said with a smile as he sized them up. Blind's heart sank immediately. That was because they had kept the fact that they had broken through to rank for a secret all along. Now that Xiao Yang had pointed it out, it was hard for him to accept it. Moreover, such a realm might be a chance for Blindswell to turn the tables. In fact, they had even tried, but did not dare to go too deep. After returning, we obtained some opportunities. It's all thanks to leader Zhao's virtue, Blindswell said with a smile. Xiao Yang only yawned in response to their flattery and did not seem to care at all. After all, these sweet words might be a sinister trick to kill her by flattery. Of course, Xiaoyang had some understanding of the two men's scheming minds. Therefore, sometimes it was not beneficial for him to say too much to them. Seeing that Xiaoyang did not say anything, Blinds was started to make guesses in his heart. This young man seemed to have always been indifferent to many things. Moreover, his current attitude was even more thought-provoking. As a result, Blinds could not help but feel more pressured. He did not know what Xiaoyang was scheming and could only wait calmly. Since he turned a deaf ear to Blinds' flattery, it could be seen that he already had a plan in his heart. Blinds became more and more frustrated as he thought about these questions. Xiaoyang did not say anything, but his eyes were fixed on the two of them. Now he wanted to see how the two of them would deal with it. It was enough to get a lot of information from their expressions and reactions. After a while, Blinds started to feel a little nervous. Under such an oppressive atmosphere, he found it hard to accept. Moreover, there might be some unforeseen events at any time. In particular, Xiaoyang's attitude was thought-provoking. Princess Mingzhu was still standing there like a wooden sculpture. From the beginning until now, she had not said a word. She didn't even show the slightest bit of happiness, anger, sorrow, or joy. No one knew what she was thinking. Perhaps she would attack at the next moment and catch them off guard. Blinds felt even more upset as he thought about these questions. Fourth-level martial emperor. With this kind of strength, you can be considered a reputable figure in the Wanshou realm. It's even possible that you can push your tribe from the bottom of the top 100 to the top, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Sometimes, because of the strength of one or two people, it was enough to increase the strength of the whole tribe and raise the status of the tribe. Blinds smiled faintly and said, "It's all thanks to Chief Zhao's blessing." After this matter was exposed, Blinds realized that this young man was very scheming and had many ideas. They could not match him. Therefore, it seemed impossible to turn the tables in his hands. Chapter 2404. This seems to have given you some confidence. Do you feel that you can try to erase my mark now that your cultivation level is high? That way you won't be threatened by me anymore? Xiaoyang suddenly sat up and stared at the two of them with murderous eyes. At this moment, the atmosphere was tense to the extreme. Blind left and blind right also seemed to have their thoughts exposed. Their bodies were trembling nonstop. They did have such thoughts before, but every time they tried, they were extremely careful and did not dare to disturb the mark at all. However, they did not expect to be discovered by Xiaoyang, even though they were extremely cautious. Blind left and blind right were drenched in cold sweat. They knew that since Xiaoyang knew everything, he also had the ability to kill them. Even Bai Cheng and Bai Xingyun had died in his hands. This was enough to show how terrifying Xiaoyang's strength was. If they were to provoke him, it would indeed be a very unwise move. It was even possible that they would lose their lives because of this. The more they thought about it, the more terrified they became. It was as if they could see the hopeless situation in front of them. Many thoughts exploded in their minds at this moment, and they felt dizzy. Since Xiaoyang had already taken precautions against them and even had the intention to kill them, then what should they do in order to avoid this calamity? If they resisted, they would have to think too much. This was because Xiaoyang's mark was still in their consciousness. If they attacked, their souls would be injured by the mark. Moreover, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu were not weak. How could they be a match for them? Therefore, under such a stark contrast, Blind left and blind right knew that if they really wanted to fight, they would face a dead end in the end. What to do next became a huge problem in their hearts. Otherwise, if they answered wrongly, they would lose their lives. At this moment, Princess Mingzhu stretched and said, "Don't scare them. Otherwise, if they are really scared, it will be detrimental to our future operations." Hearing this, Xiaoyang smiled indifferently. The murderous aura around him disappeared completely in an instant, and he looked as if nothing had happened. Seeing this change, Blind left and blind right secretly heaved a sigh of relief. If this matter was really pursued, then they would really have to bear the consequences. Even if they were still useful and did not lose their lives, they would not have an easy time. The information you provided was very accurate, and I am very pleased about it. Since the two of you keep your promises, I, Xiaoyang, will not burn the bridge after crossing it. Xiaoyang slowly stood up and said. However, blind left and blind right did not calm down. They knew very well that Xiaoyang might end their lives in the next moment. Moreover, although they had not heard of Xiaoyang's means, how could he be a kind person since he could reach where he was now? How could those who did not have the protection of the clan's mighty figures not experience bloodshed and killing if they wanted to climb to a high position? These things are a thank you gift for the two of you. I think that if the Ash Wolf clan wants to rise, these things are essential. Xiaoyang said as he threw a ring to him. Blind Left hesitated for a long time before he picked up the ring and began to check the things inside. Blind Left was shocked because he also recognized the things inside. They were spirit-gathering pills. Blind Left did not think much of such pills before, but after he went back and tested them on some juniors, he found that the effects were very wonderful. At this moment, Blind Left's hands could not help but tremble slightly, because what he saw was the rise of the Ash Wolf clan. In the Battle of the Western Plains in the Sword Heart Realm, most of the elites of the Ash Wolf clan died there. For their clan, it could be said to be a great loss. If the two of them had not returned alive, they would have been replaced by a new clan and fallen from the top 100 clans. If they had these pills, the strength of the Ash Wolf clan could be improved rapidly. Blind Right just watched silently. Although his combat power was strong, his brain was not as good as Blind Left's. However, he also knew that these things should be left to Blind Left to decide. Master Xiao said that you can make our Ash Wolf clan rise. Is that true? Blind Left suddenly asked excitedly. Previously, Blind Left felt that Xiaoyang's promise was just a pie in the sky. But now it seemed that it was not the case. Now he felt that the sincerity was very great. It could be said that this was a great opportunity for the Ash Wolf clan to rise. I can only provide you with these things. It's an equivalent exchange. Xiaoyang smiled faintly and said. These words sounded very realistic, but Blind Left felt very at ease. No force would be supported inexplicably, so there was no problem with this deal if there was an exchange with a price. With this sentence, Blind Left felt even calmer. However, I am indeed going to take action against the 10 great clans. At that time, there will be chaos in the Wan Beast realm. As an outsider, it's not good for me to interfere with your internal affairs. So, it will depend on your own ability to reach that stage. Xiaoyang said with a smile. There were many things that could not be promised easily. So, Xiaoyang did not think of setting up a big trap. He just wanted to create chaos here. Heroes emerged in troubled times. As for how far Blind Left and Blind Right could go, it would depend on their own ability. Blind Left nodded with a smile. It was naturally the fairest deal to be able to make things clear and get what they needed. That's for the best. Blind Left smiled. Now, Blind's already had some ideas in his mind. He had also made sufficient preparations. As long as they could obtain the elixirs provided by Xiaoyang, they would naturally become stronger. As for whether it would be slower, it did not matter. After all, at least there was some hope. However, I still have to remind you that I don't care how much trouble you cause in the Wan Beast realm. If you dare to take action against the Four Realm Alliance, you are courting death. Xiaoyang sneered. Blind Left waved his hand indifferently and said, Leader Xiao, do you think I am a fool? Now that my life is in your hands, how would I dare to do this? Blind Left still did not say a word, but he could sense that the situation had changed greatly. Take out what I need first. Xiaoyang said indifferently. Chapter 2405. Over the past few days, news began to spread from the Enflame realm. It was unknown where the news came from, but it said that the Myriad Beast realm had fallen into chaos and that the conflicts between them had become more and more serious. The gradual withdrawal of the troops stationed in the Enflame realm was proof of this. In the beginning, no one believed such a statement. However, as time passed, some busybodies went to investigate and found that the troops stationed in the Myriad Beast realm had indeed begun to decrease. As a result, the rumor was no longer a rumor. Instead, it became a fact. For a time, some of the Enflame realm's experts began to gather. They wanted to discuss an excellent solution. They had been invaded by the Myriad Beast realm for thousands of years, and they had suffered a lot of grievances. Therefore, how to counterattack became their top priority. The current Enflame world had also become turbulent, and the various forces had also begun to become active, wanting to make a beautiful comeback. When the troops stationed in the Enflame realm received this news, they were even more shocked. They didn't know what went wrong for the news to leak out and cause the cultivators of the Enflame realm to become restless. However, everyone in power knew that if they continued to withdraw their troops, it would likely lead to unrest and a counterattack from the Enflame realm. In that situation, once the cultivators of the Enflame realm began to counterattack, they would be forced to retreat. Otherwise, they would all die here. The psychological tug-of-war between the two sides became extremely tense because of this rumor. As the person in charge, King Zhao was enjoying this feeling in a large city in the Enflame realm. Since he couldn't come to an agreement with them, it wasn't a bad choice to use another method to make them fight. This was where King Zhao was brilliant. He didn't expose the four-realm alliance and still achieved his goal. Although there were many uncertainties, it was enough as long as he could keep the army of the Myriad Beast realm here. This way, it would be enough to share the pressure on Xiaoyang and buy time for the four-realm alliance. When King Da received the message from King Zhao, he fell into deep thought. He was calculating the gains and losses in this matter. After a long time, King Da heaved a sigh of relief. After repeated discussions, he felt that King Zhao's method was the most reliable. If Princess Mingzhu was still in the God realm, then there would naturally be no need to worry about these things. However, the situation now was very different. They lacked absolute strength. If they were to ask for reinforcements, it would be like inviting a wolf into the house. As long as he could stir up this storm, there would be more possibilities in the future. King Zhao's move is indeed brilliant, the old Prime Minister muttered with a smile. Although the three kings had once studied under the old Prime Minister, the three children back then had already grown into three important figures. There were even existences that the old man had to look up to. Now, the old Prime Minister also understood why the God Emperor did not ascend to the middle world alone. Instead, he wanted to bring the God realm back to its original position. With King Da, who could pacify the internal affairs, King Qin, who was good at war, and King Zhao, who could stir up the storm with his glib tongue, they were indeed confident. It was just that they had been too optimistic in the beginning. Fortunately, they had made sufficient preparations. Otherwise, in the invasion of the Myriad Beast realm, with just the strength of the divine world, even if they were not destroyed, they would have lost most of their territories. Jiang Zhongqing smiled bitterly. Suddenly, he felt that he was really old. When he was in the 3,000 small worlds, he could handle all kinds of things well. However, when he was in the middle world, it was obvious that it was not enough. It was easy to add flowers to brocade in a flourishing age. However, when the situation was tense, it was extremely difficult to provide timely help. Let's see how third brother will explain the situation, King Qin muttered with some anticipation. Now, King Qin was more and more satisfied. They should take the initiative to attack. At least from the current situation, everything was developing in a good direction. If they were still in a defensive state, they could only wait for the Myriad Beasts realm to invade in a highly tense situation. When that time came, the final outcome of the war would be to retreat step by step until they were annihilated. King Da laughed as well. Although he and King Zhao did have some conflicts, under such circumstances, all prejudices would be put aside. Unrivaled God was dozing off on the side. He did not seem to care about this news at all. He had always been like this. After analyzing everything clearly, he would appear to be very indifferent. He would even feel that this had nothing to do with him. Wu Shuang, what do you think we should do next to cooperate with them? King Qin suddenly glanced sideways and asked with a smile. Unrivaled God seemed to be startled awake all of a sudden. He stared at his fourth uncle, gnashing his teeth in hatred. It was not easy for him to take the opportunity to slack off, but he was still being asked questions. How else can we cooperate? With our current abilities and knowledge. Can we do a third thing to affect the overall situation? Unrivaled God said with some disdain. Everyone looked displeased when they heard Unrivaled God's words. They were displeased not because they thought Unrivaled God spoke without thinking, but because what he said was the truth and there was nothing they could do about it. The way I see it, it's better to organize the troops and send them to the Drifting Cloud Realm and the Sword Heart Realm respectively, Unrivaled God said. Although Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu had already begun to move, how much of an effect could their ruckus have? These were all unknowns. Therefore, it was more important to strengthen the defense line as soon as possible. At the very least, they would not have to worry about the enemy taking over their foothold without any preparation. King De's expression became much more serious when he heard this. This was indeed the main point that they should settle on. Colorful mountain range. Two people, one in black and one in white, walked through the forest. They looked like they were part of a painting. The two of them walked together but kept a low profile. They did not make the slightest sound with each step they took. It was as if they had become one with the environment here. After walking for a long time, the black-robed man suddenly stopped and said, "Let's start here." The woman nodded with a smile when she heard this. She said, "Can we trust their words?" The black-robed man hesitated and did not answer for a long time. Chapter 2406. Xiao Yang just smiled indifferently. He naturally knew who Princess Mingzhu was talking about. Left Blind and Right Blind were from the Beast Realm, although Xiao Yang had something on them. However, who could guarantee that they would not sacrifice themselves for their own world? Although in the cave, Xiao Yang used a combination of kindness and power to make Left Blind and Right Blind tremble with fear, it was only temporary. There was another situation, which was that after the other party escaped, they would go to the top almighty of the Beast Realm to remove the imprint in the Sea of Consciousness. As long as the imprint was removed, they would no longer be under Xiao Yang's control. I can't believe it, but I believe in their ambition. Xiao Yang said, the corners of his mouth raised slightly. Most of the cultivators in the Beast Realm did not have the consciousness of self-sacrifice, and even their internal conflicts were endless. As for the invasion war against the outside world, it was completely because of the same interests, so they would unite. Once there were no interests, they might start to fight against each other. This was the internal culture of the Beast Realm, and it was also because of this reason that the Beast Realm dominated the tripartite balance of power and even destroyed one of the worlds. Even now, the Yin Flame Realm could only barely protect itself. Cultivators who grew up under the influence of killing were also extremely terrifying. Because of wandering between life and death, it made them more bloodthirsty and aggressive. Princess Mingzhu frowned slightly when she heard this. Although she was not very good at scheming, and even felt that there must be something fishy about it, she chose to trust Xiao Yang unconditionally. Since her companion had already said so, she naturally would not think too much about it. Moreover, do not doubt the people you use. If you always have a suspicious attitude, I'm afraid you will live a very tiring life. The reason why Princess Mingzhu was able to advance by leaps and bounds in her realm was largely because she could maintain her mind in an incomparably pure state. When the mind was free of distracting thoughts, it would be easy to do many things, especially in the midst of cultivation. It required a calm state of mind. They are indeed quite ambitious, but I don't know if their strength is enough to match it, Princess Mingzhu said calmly. Although Left Blind and Right Blind had both reached the 4th level of the martial royal realm, their strength was the weakest among those in the same realm. This was also the reason why Li Fengmu was able to suppress the two of them with a single sword strike on the battlefield of the Western Plains. Xiaoyang just smiled. After all, it was still not appropriate for him to talk about these things. However, one thing was certain, and that was that their brains were good. Perhaps they could really find some opportunities in this chaotic situation. Although it was difficult for them to control the entire Wanshou realm, it was enough for the Grey Wolf clan's ranking to rise continuously. They might even have a chance to enter the ranks of the top 10 tribes. Of course, this also depended on how many of the 10 clans could survive this scheme. After all, there were many variables involved. Left Blind wasn't the only one with a good brain. Perhaps some of the other tribes were already ready to make a move, but because there wasn't the right time, they didn't make a move. There were many possibilities in this, and no one could be certain of them. However, Xiaoyang gradually put these matters aside. After all, their goal was to use this method to create chaos in the Wanshou realm. As long as they couldn't unite their attacks, they could attack in batches. With the current strength of the Four Realms Alliance, they could still defend against them. As a result, Xiaoyang had become very calm. If he wanted to deal with these matters properly, he naturally had to face every detail calmly. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. That will depend on their own abilities, Xiaoyang smiled calmly and said. Princess Mingzhu nodded slightly. She wasn't interested in discussing this matter in depth. After all, they didn't want to be enslaved by other realms. So naturally, they wouldn't enslave other realms. Moreover, they had no choice but to attack now. If they had a choice, they definitely wouldn't have come here. After all, there were too many variables. Moreover, they had taken the initiative to attack the Wanshou realm this time. They might even take the initiative to fight to the death. Even if they knew the outcome, they could only brace themselves and come. Otherwise, once the army of the Wanshou realm marched over, the consequences would be severe. Therefore, they already knew what to do in this aspect. No matter how much risk they had to bear, they still had to do it. I only hope that Left Blind's information is correct. Princess Mingzhu sighed inexplicably. This was the place they chose to attack this time. The Multicolor Mountain Range was the base of the last of the 10 great tribes. This tribe had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. It was also named the Multicolor Tribe because of the Multicolor Mountain Range. In the war with the Yin Flame World, the Multicolor Tribe had sent most of their elites to the battlefield. Even though they had started to withdraw recently, it was still very slow. After all, they wanted to take down the Wanshou realm. It was just a matter of convenience. Therefore, they were most concerned about how to avoid being at a disadvantage in the war with the Yin Flame World. They could not tolerate any mistakes. As a result, there were very few Almighties guarding the Multicolor Mountain Range. Therefore, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu could sneak in without anyone noticing. According to Left Blind's information, the number of martial emperors in the Multicolor tribe was pitifully few. This was because most of them had gone to the main battlefield. Those who stayed behind to guard the tribe were mostly left behind to train their juniors. Among them, there was only one Martial Emperor 3rd and Martial Emperor 4th level each. As the last of the 10 great tribes, the Multicolor tribe had also shown signs of a decline in talents over the past few thousand years. That was why they seemed so reluctant. Of course, Xiaoyang's target was not these people. It was the Multicolor tribe's chief. The chief of the Multicolor tribe had just become a Martial Emperor 5th level 10 years ago. That was how they managed to maintain their position as the last of the 10 great tribes. Otherwise, they would probably still be fighting with the top 100 clans for these titles. It could be said that the strength of the last of the 10 great tribes was indeed the weakest. Moreover, compared to the other tribes, the gap between them was slightly huge. This was not only in terms of the top powerhouses, but also in terms of the juniors. Chapter 2407. It could be said that the Multicolor tribe's position was on the verge of collapse. If it were not for their chief strength, they would have been kicked out long ago. Moreover, the war with the Yin Flame World made it difficult for the 10 great tribes to start a war with each other. That was why the multicolor tribe could continue to survive. Otherwise, they would have been swallowed up by other forces long ago. How could they be safe and sound here? The situation in the Wansho realm was so realistic and cruel. If one strength was not enough, they could only be swallowed up and destroyed. The multicolor tribe was only able to survive until today because of their reputation as one of the 10 great tribes. If they lost this reputation, those restless forces would probably swarm over and divide them up. Even though the multicolor tribe was the weakest of the 10 great tribes, they also had a 5th level martial emperor. This level of strength was much stronger than any of the worlds in the 4 Realms Alliance. This was also the horror of the Wansho realm. As long as one of the 10 major tribes was picked out, it was enough to give the 4 Realms Alliance a headache and tiring to deal with. If the 10 great tribes joined forces to attack, it would be a devastating blow to the 4 Realms Alliance. As a result, the 4 Realms Alliance had no choice but to attack. They had to break the enemy's courage so that they would not have the energy to invade. Be careful. Xiaoyang looked around. When he saw that Princess Mingzhu had gone far away, he whispered. Princess Mingzhu nodded with a smile and said, I understand. Now, the 2 of them had started what they were doing. They were going to surround the mountain with a formation so that the people inside would not be able to escape for the time being. Furthermore, they had to set up some maze formations so that the people outside would not be able to see what was happening in the mountain. Because there was a scheme involved, their every word, action, and action had to be carefully tidied up. If there was a mistake, it would be bad news for them. In this first battle, they had to be careful with every scheme they made. Perhaps if their scheme succeeded this time, they would be able to save a lot of effort in their subsequent operations. This was also the reason why the 2 of them were so careful. If they wanted to achieve their goal, it would definitely not be an easy task. Even when they were setting up the array, they had to be very careful. If they made too much noise, it might alert the Almighty in the mountain. Now that they wanted to kill him, they naturally could not act rashly and alert him. Princess Mingzhu's movements were also very slow, but when she did things, she was very meticulous. This was an important matter. So how could she be careless? Furthermore, Princess Mingzhu was very clear that if this plan succeeded, it might even arouse the suspicions of the 10 great clans. Then, if they fanned the flames, they might not even need to do anything, and there would be estrangement between the 10 great tribes. Even the grievances that had been accumulated for a long time would all erupt. When the time came, it would not be impossible for the 10 great clans to go to war. Therefore, sometimes it was very important to try. As long as you have the idea and the heart to do it, there is a chance and probability of success. If you don't even want to try, I'm afraid you'll only fail. From time to time, Princess Mingzhu would raise her head to look at her companion, and she felt much more at peace. It seemed like as long as he was around, no matter how dangerous the situation was, he could always come up with a good plan to achieve a perfect ending. Princess Mingzhu also felt that Xiaoyang's understanding of him was like a mystery, and she could not see through him. Nevertheless, he made her feel that he really existed, and it made her feel at ease. Soon after, Princess Mingzhu did not think too much about it, and she focused on what she was doing. The formation that they were going to set up looked simple, but it was very intricate. This was because every part of the formation seemed to be in harmony with the universe, and it was very difficult to find it. Nevertheless, most of the things that they buried were spirit stones, talismans, and the like. Once the formation's power was exhausted, the items would become extremely ordinary items. By then, it would be impossible to find any clues from them. It was a very difficult task to prevent any news from leaking out. Therefore, when they were setting up the formation, they could not allow the slightest mistake. As for Xiaoyang, his expression was normal as he set up the formation. At the same time, he began to calculate and plan again in his heart. Although they had already planned everything on the way here, what he needed to do now was to check and fill in the gaps, so as to avoid any negligence. The rehearsal that they had discussed was, after all, a little forced. No matter how much one thought about it, It was inevitable that there would be some mistakes and mistakes. Some details might even be overlooked. In this regard, Xiaoyang had to put in more effort. At the same time, Xiaoyang's mind was also focused on the flowing cloud world. As he had the Caesar paradise as a medium, he could somewhat sense what was happening over there. Fortunately, everything was normal, and he did not discover anything had happened. At least it was peaceful for now. Therefore, Xiaoyang was relieved, and he began to concentrate on his own task. According to the information given by Blind Left and Blind Right, although the multicolor clan leader had just become a 5th-level martial emperor 10 years ago, he was still in existence that could not be ignored because of his youthful vigor. Even if Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu joined forces, it would still be difficult to kill a 5th-level martial emperor. The difference in their realms was also where Xiaoyang's disadvantage lay. Although it was said that with Princess Mingzhu's help, it was still very difficult. After all, the disadvantage in terms of realms could not be made up with numbers. However, it should be known that the difference between realms was not something that could be made up by adding 1 to 1. Looking at the incomparably huge mountain peak, Xiaoyang smiled and shook his head. He said, "Fortunately, this place is big enough. It can be your burial ground." After he finished speaking, Xiaoyang's speed increased by a few notches. Although there were few people here, and the clan leader was in seclusion, so no one dared to come close. However, they still had to be careful. If this matter was discovered, their plan might be completely ruined. Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu spent a total of 4 hours before they were able to complete the setup of the array. Although this project could not be considered vast, it needed to be meticulous. Chapter 2408. In the Sword Scar Abyss, a young man lay on the ground. His aura had become very weak. His back was already badly mutilated. If one took a closer look, they would be able to see that it was all caused by sword qi. Moreover, that was not all. Wisps of black qi slowly seeped into his body along with the sword scars. Bai Jian did not know how long it had been since he entered the Sword Scar Abyss, but he was now in a very difficult situation. In the beginning, he could still use his own strength to resist the sword qi, the cold wind, and the demonic power. However, by now, all his strength had been exhausted. It was impossible for him to continue. He could no longer move forward like a walking corpse. He lay there, allowing the various forces to destroy him. It was not that he did not want to fight back, but in his current situation, there was no way for him to fight back. Bai Jian had already tried his best, but the heavens did not let him. He had also underestimated the terror of the Sword Scar Abyss. So what if one was a martial emperor expert? This place was not only targeted at one's strength, but also at one's mental state. It was also because of the lack of mental state that even though some cultivators of the Sword Heart realm walked out of the Sword Scar Abyss, they did not end up soaring to the sky. Instead, their strength was greatly reduced, and they were stagnant, unable to advance at all. It was also because of these reasons that the Sword Scar Abyss had become a forbidden area. It could be said that this was the nightmare of most cultivators of the Sword Heart realm. Rumor had it that there were countless opportunities here, but no one could obtain them. Bai Jian also believed in this, so he walked in without hesitation, wanting to clear up some of the difficult and complicated illnesses that had been left behind. However, he did not expect that he seemed to be no different from the previous cultivators. Moreover, which one of those who could enter this place were not proud geniuses? All the predecessors had been defeated, and it was not surprising that he, Bai Jian, was the same. However, Bai Jian was still unwilling in his heart. Could it be that he was going to fall just like that? Was his cultivation path coming to an end now? Bai Jian kept asking himself in his heart. There were too many unwillingness and many thoughts. At this moment, they were surging like a storm. He was unwilling to accept this. He had to resist. If he fell like this, what kind of scandal would that be? What was the point of him walking all this way? At the same time, Bai Jian was also shouting. He was unwilling to accept this reality. Wasn't everything he had done for the sake of moving forward? Wasn't it to break through the shackles and reach a higher level? If he gave in like this, then his life would really be over. Therefore, Bai Jian became even more resolute in his decision. All of a sudden, some of the broken things started to gather together. His already cracked sword heart also began to slowly heal under the influence of this powerful will. Although the speed was very slow, it was much better than the previous situation. Bai Jian also felt a very mysterious state. Even though he did not have any strength left, his eyes still emitted a trace of sword light. So what if he fell? He just needed to find another opportunity to stand up. The opportunity could come at any time. If it didn't come, then he would try to stand up, instead of just lying on the ground. Bai Jian's pure nature and thoughts caused some sword essence to faintly appear between his brows. Perhaps it was because of Bai Jian's change, but the surrounding chilly wind suddenly became more violent. More sword auras were formed continuously, and the tips of the swords were all aimed at the young man in white. It was as if the sword auras here were always so powerful. It was impossible for him to stand up. He had to completely shatter his state of mind. Come on. Bai Jian roared in a low voice with only toughness. However, in the next moment, countless sword auras shot towards Bai Jian's back. At the same time, countless sword auras appeared around Bai Jian's body. They looked extremely pure. Crackling sounds could be heard continuously. The sword auras protecting Bai Jian's body were completely shattered at this moment. Instantly, countless sword auras pierced Bai Jian's back again, causing him to grimace in pain. Bai Jian's nerves were as taut as a bowstring and could snap at any time. Bai Jian only gritted his teeth and silently endured everything. His unyielding heart made him unwilling to fall just like that. He was very clear about what he wanted. So what if his body was riddled with holes? As long as he still had a shred of faith, he would definitely persevere. The one who could defeat him would always be himself, and not these external forces. Although the sword scar abyss was very strange, it was not impossible to deal with. Even until now, Bai Jian had yet to comprehend the existence of the sword scar abyss. There were still some opportunities here, but his temperament had become firm because of these tribulations. The path of cultivation was filled with thorns. If one was careless and fell into a mountain of swords and a sea of fire, one could only slowly climb out. So what if one was bathed in blood? Only those who could stand up had the right to stand at the peak. If he gave up because of this setback, Bai Jian felt that he would never be able to forgive himself. The time for indulgence had passed. What he needed to do now was to do his best to find his arrogant self. And because of that arrogance, how could Bai Jian willingly fall behind others? Therefore, what he needed to do was to stand up. Not only that, but he also needed to catch up with his peers. If his previous state continued, how could he still have a chance? Xiaoyang was able to become the 10th martial emperor of the 3,000 small worlds. So why couldn't he, Bai Jian, stand up after failing to break through? Some miracles would only exist if you created them. If you always thought that miracles would come by themselves, then it was really a fool's dream. Furthermore, the miracle that he created was the most beautiful thing in the world. Even though Bai Jian had endless arrogance, his sea of consciousness gradually began to shatter under the crisscrossing sword chi. Bai Jian still did not panic. He was still protecting his heart. So what if his sea of consciousness was completely shattered? If the shattered sword heart could not be repaired, even if he lived, it would be meaningless. However, because his sea of consciousness was shattering, Bai Jian felt that the world was getting darker and darker. Even his senses had become dull. When the sword qi pierced his body, he could not feel it. Chapter 2409. During this period of time, the Wanshou realm was also actively preparing for the invasion of the Four Realms Alliance. Almost half of the 10 great tribes were participating. In fact, many of them were already prepared. However, because of the precedent of the White Bear tribe, some tribes did not dare to act rashly. This was because they knew clearly that since the White Bear tribe was defeated by the Four Realms Alliance after going all out, they would probably be annihilated if they went alone. Therefore, they had to wait for the army to be completely assembled before making their move. Only in this way could they defeat the Four Realms Alliance in one go. According to the news from the White Bear tribe, they did not take it seriously at first and invaded in batches. However, the more they fought, the stronger their opponents became. From this, it could be seen that the Four Realms Alliance was very resilient. Therefore, under such a premise, they could not give them the slightest chance. At the very least, the purpose of this battle was to completely break their morale. Otherwise, it would really be reborn when the spring breeze blows. There were many reasons and things that they did not dare to slack off in the slightest. Many people even began to have some thoughts. After all, the Four Realms Alliance was said to have 4 realms. However, they were only small realms and were not enough for them to divide. Therefore, if they wanted to get more things and benefits, they had to have some thoughts. If they did not do anything, they would really miss out on these things. Sometimes they had to think more. After all, the more they thought, the more they could get. If they did not think about anything and just waited for the distribution, the things they could get would be very little. Many tribes in the Wansho realm were preparing to join the invasion. In the opinion of some higher-ups, once they succeeded in taking down the Four Realms Alliance, the strength of the Wansho realm would inevitably skyrocket. At that time, they could take down the Inflame realm in one go. Then, the strength of the Wansho realm would become more and more powerful. Under such a premise, they could continue to nibble away at their opponents. They might even be able to reach the top of this world and go to a more advanced place. At the beginning, many almighty people thought so. However, they did not expect the Inflame realm to be so strong. After fighting with them for almost 10,000 years, they were still in a stalemate. Moreover, the previous general attack had caused both sides to suffer a great deal of damage. Moreover, it was only in recent years that they had barely recovered. Even when they were fighting, they would pay extra attention and calculate the gains and losses. If it wasn't for the fact that they had a huge advantage, they wouldn't have acted rashly. Otherwise, once a bitter battle broke out, it was unknown how many experts would be lost. This was especially true for those with high cultivation bases. If one of them died, there would be one less. Moreover, it was unknown how long it would take for a new expert to grow up. Therefore, they had no choice but to be cautious with all these possibilities. Or perhaps it was because they thought too much and cared too much about too many things that caused the situation to be in a stalemate and unable to be broken. 100 miles north of the multicolored mountain range, 2 blind men were squatting on a tree, looking very relaxed. Not long after, a wolf ran over cautiously. Song Lang looked around. After confirming that he was not being followed, he revealed his human form. "Ancestors, I've done what you asked me to do," that person said with a smile. Blind Left nodded in satisfaction and said, "All right, you may leave. Remember, keep this to yourself and don't think too much about it." That person smiled and nodded when he heard that. How could they not know that there were some mysteries in this matter? Moreover, once this matter was exposed, their Song Lang clan might face the disaster of being exterminated. Therefore, how could they not be cautious? "Ancestor, don't worry. I understand." After that person finished speaking, he revealed his original form again and left quickly. Blind Left and Blind Right looked at each other and smiled. They didn't know the effect of the plan, but it would definitely cause some waves in the beast world. What they had to do was add fuel to the fire and make this matter more intense. Only in this way could the 10 great clans start to be wary of each other and become completely chaotic. With such an effect, they could take advantage of the chaos to gain more benefits. I have to say that Xiao Yang's plan is really ingenious. Blind Right smiled. Blind Left smiled and nodded. He thought so too. However, such a plan could be said to be a very low-level method. Those with discerning eyes could easily see through what was going on. However, Xiao Yang also took advantage of this point to set a trap. So what if they saw through it? This was just a reason for them to start a war. Moreover, the news they spread was very simple. The White Bear clan was preparing to attack the Multicolor clan. The White Bear clan and the Multicolor clan had some friction in the past. Even earlier, the by bloodline and the Multicolor clan had many grudges. Therefore, once this news spread, the Multicolor clan would have to think more about it. When the time came, they could add fuel to the fire and exaggerate it. Perhaps they would be able to obtain more unexpected results. Thinking about these problems, Blind Left felt very comfortable in his heart. Although Blind Left and the others were previously a subordinate clan of the White Bear clan, they were often bullied. Therefore, now that they had a chance to take revenge, how could they not seize this great opportunity? Opportunities did not come often, but once they came, they had to seize it. As for how the situation would develop, Blind Left did not care. After all, at this point, all they could do was wait and see. If they sometimes thought too much and took the initiative to do something, they might end up leaving more clues and flaws. If some people with ulterior motives saw through them, it would be a disaster for the Ash Wolf clan. They were well aware of the severity of the matter, but they still wanted to pull chestnuts out of the fire. Let's go. Let's see what will happen to that almighty, Blind Left said. He jumped down from the tree trunk and walked forward. On the other hand, Blind Right smiled indifferently and immediately followed after him. On the main peak of the Multicolor mountain range, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu met again. The formation they had set up had been completed. Next, they could start killing people and remove the last of the 10 great clans. Chapter 2410. I didn't expect you to be so fast, Princess Mingzhu said with a smile. Xiaoyang only smiled. He felt that the speed was a little slow. In fact, he felt that it could be faster. However, in order to not leak any traces, there was only one thing he could do, which was to be steady and get rid of all the hidden dangers. After all, he had to be careful in the face of such matters. After all, if some details were leaked, it might affect their deployment in the future. Therefore, if they were to alert the enemy, it would not be good news for them. At least for now, Xiaoyang felt that their whereabouts could not be leaked. Otherwise, there would be endless troubles. Moreover, if they completely infuriated the enemy from the beginning, they would have to bear more things. In this way, Xiaoyang's heart became very clear. Naturally, it was no longer a problem for him to decide what to do. Shall we begin now? Princess Mingzhu asked softly. Xiaoyang nodded and said yes. Moreover, the sooner this matter was carried out, the more beneficial it would be for the Four Realms Alliance. Let's begin! Xiaoyang shouted and immediately soared into the sky. At the same time, his hands kept forming seals. Immediately, the surroundings of the mountain began to emit a strange light. It looked faintly discernible. Xiaoyang needed to use the method to completely isolate the mountain with a barrier so that others would not easily discover the changes here. Of course, if one was powerful enough, they could still see through the barrier and the camouflage. However, it wasn't easy to see through such a scheme in the multicolored mountain range. Moreover, they had made a lot of preparations on their way here. They wanted to ensure that this operation would be foolproof, and they did not have to be overly worried about it. They did not want to miss out on important matters because of nervousness. In the blink of an eye, the mountain was completely shrouded, making it difficult to see the situation inside. At this moment, Princess Mingzhu could not help but be moved. She was very curious about how many tricks Xiaoyang had up his sleeves. It seemed that all along his methods were endless. As a result, people had no choice but to think more about it. It seemed that no matter what domain it was, Xiaoyang had his own unique insights. In fact, he even knew a little and was somewhat proficient in it. It was hard to imagine how this guy had survived all these years to learn so many things. Moreover, the main point was that although Xiaoyang had learned a variety of things, there were still areas that he was proficient in. It could be said that this was the most terrifying aspect of Xiaoyang. Many cultivators cultivated many techniques due to their greed, but in the end, due to their limited energy, they learned too much and their progress became much slower. However, Xiaoyang did not have such a situation. In fact, he was still one step ahead of his peers in many aspects. This was truly terrifying. It was also because of this that Princess Mingzhu felt more at ease. This was because she felt that Xiaoyang was indeed very reliable. In this case, she did not need to spend too much effort in the upcoming battle. She only needed to draw her sword and fight. As long as she displayed all of her abilities, these problems would naturally become much simpler. Furthermore, what Princess Mingzhu needed was an extremely pure heart. This was the only way she could fully concentrate on the battle and display her full strength instead of being unable to do anything. Soon, Xiaoyang landed on the ground. He and Princess Mingzhu looked at each other and began to climb the mountain. Now that everything was ready, it was time to get to work. Outside the main peak, Left Blind and Right Blind arrived separately. When they saw the peaceful picture scroll, they were stunned for a moment before they laughed out loud. They knew very well that the plan had already begun to be implemented. What they needed to do was to wait for the results of the battle. As for who would become the new last of the 10 great tribes after the multicolor tribe fell, this was something that people were looking forward to. When the time came, the remaining 9 great tribes might be involved in a bloody battle because of the fight for the title. One must know that the multicolor tribe controlled the entire multicolor mountain range. Even the surrounding hundreds of miles of land belonged to them. How could the other tribes not be tempted by such precious land resources? Left Blind and Right Blind were also very clear that they could not be anxious at this time. When the time came, they would wait for the other tribes to start a war. They could fight however they wanted. Even if their tribes were to be wiped out, it would not matter. This was the only way for them to have the opportunity to move forward. After all, Left Blind was a cultivator in the 4th level martial emperor realm. Although he could not see Duan Tongtian, he could still see some of the changes in the mountain if he took a closer look. However, he could not see it in detail. He could only see it roughly. They also had the opportunity and possibility to see it clearly, but they would have to invest more spiritual power to do so. When the time came, it was inevitable that they would disturb some people. If Xiaoyang's plan was exposed and the reason behind it was because of the 2 of them, they would not be able to escape death. Left Blind and Right Blind did not plan to join the battle. This time they came more to observe. They wanted to see if Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu's abilities could completely defeat the multicolor tribe. Once the 2 of them succeeded, Left Blind's heart would become firm and he would know what to do. If Xiaoyang accidentally lost his life here, he would only have himself to blame. When the time came, Left Blind and Right Blind would regain their freedom and would not be restricted. It was also because they had calculated so clearly that they knew that no matter what, they would benefit from it. That was why they were so attentive. In a short while, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu had already arrived at the mountain peak. At the same time, the 2 of them no longer concealed their auras. They respectively burst out and began to force the Almighty hiding in the mountain to come out. The 2 of them were slightly nervous. This was their first time fighting with a 5th level martial Emperor Realm Almighty. It was still difficult to predict the outcome. The most nervous person was Princess Mingzhu, because she had forcefully broken through her realm. Her foundation was still somewhat unstable. Therefore, she could not display her full strength.